Hogwarts. Voldemort, don't stop me from studying. Chapter 41. On the day when Professor Murray held a party, Wade changed into the dress and dragonhide boots that Fiona carefully selected for him after breakfast. He stood in front of the mirror and Fiona circled him, adjusting some details from time to time. "So handsome, baby." Fiona kept uttering all kinds of exaggerated praises. "You are definitely the most dazzling little gentleman at the party. Seriously, why don't you just let me pick out the necklace for you to wear? The bow and arrow shaped pendant is super cool and will definitely make other kids jealous." "No, Mom, I'm not a 3-year-old child." Wade firmly refused without hesitation. Fiona sighed. "I didn't want to wear it even when I was 3 years old. So when I was 11 I didn't even know how to wear one." Ferdinand raised his wrist to check the time from time to time, and looked out the door from time to time. "The professor said he would pick you up at 10 o'clock, right?" he confirmed with his son. "Yes, that's what the letter said. But it was 1 minute before 10 o'clock, and there was still no one outside the door." "Are you late?" Fiona guessed. "Maybe there is something delayed." Ferdinand looked at the door again. "I just hope they don't suddenly appear at the door." "That's not possible. There are ordinary people around here. How many people will see that?" Fiona said firmly. "It must have been delayed by something. Maybe we will receive an owl soon." The letter came, Fiona said, running over and opening a window so that the owl could fly in. Just when she turned around, the flame in the fireplace suddenly turned green, making the whole room green, and then a dark shadow came out of the fireplace. Ferdinand jumped up, quickly reached behind his clothes with his right hand and pulled out his pistol, and pushed Vader back with the other hand, shouting, "Who is it?" "No, Dad, it's Professor Murray." Wade hurriedly grabbed his arm, and suddenly found that his father's palm was very cold. He looked over in surprise and found that Ferdinand was clenching his teeth, the veins on his neck were popping out, and his tense expression looked very cold and unfamiliar. Wade was stunned for a moment. From the moment he received the acceptance letter to Hogwarts, the Greys had always seemed very happy. They are full of curiosity about the world of magic and eagerly participate in the world here. They know almost more about the wizarding world than Vader. Vader had always thought that was the case. But at this moment, he suddenly discovered that his father might have always hidden a deep fear of the wizarding world. Fiona was only startled at first, but calmed down after hearing Wade's words. She took a few steps forward and asked curiously, "Is this flow travel?" Ferdinand walked over quickly, as if he and his wife were going to greet the guests. But Wade saw that he was actually standing in front of Fiona. Stepping out of the flames was indeed Professor Murray. He patted the soot on his body and said with a smile, "Yes, it is a safe and convenient way to travel. Except for the soot, everything is fine. Hello, Mr. Gray, Mrs. Gray, I am Terence Murray, I think you should know." Of course, Ferdinand had already put away his pistol, and there was nothing strange on his face. "Welcome, Professor Murray. I'm sorry, my fireplace has not been thoroughly cleaned in more than 2 years." Fiona poked her head out from behind him and asked, "Can we travel on fire too?" "Oh, probably not," Professor Murray said with a smile. "Actually, the Ministry of Magic prohibits connecting the fireplaces of non-magical people's homes to the flow network. In order to pick up Vader, I asked someone to temporarily open the flow network for me. The authority of the network will be restored after we leave. Vader, I'm glad to see you are ready." "Yes, Professor." Vader glanced at his parents, put his wand into the wand pocket on his dress robe, walked over and said, "Shall we leave now?" "Of course, the guests are waiting for us." Professor Murray magically pulled out a small bag containing sparkling powder and asked, "Have you ever used flow powder?" "No, Professor. It's easy, just watch what I do." He handed the bag to Wade, picked up a handful of powder and threw it into the fire. Suddenly the flames turned green. "Remember, you must state the address clearly, Suo Luo Garden. Close your eyes and don't wander around in the fireplace, otherwise you will get bruised, and you may even come out from other fireplaces." Professor Murray walked straight into the fire and demonstrated, "The Cypress Garden." He disappeared from the fire with a whoosh. Wade also pinched a handful of flow powder and walked towards the fireplace. When he was about to throw it away, he turned back, looked at his father deeply and said, "Dad, I'll be back in the evening." "Yeah." Ferdinand's throat rolled. He wanted to say something but held back, and looked down at him. Follow your professor, don't conflict with others. I understand. Wade nodded seriously. Fiona put her hands on her hips and pretended to be angry. I only want to say goodbye to my father, but not my mother. How could it be? Wade smiled, stepped forward and hugged his mother. Goodbye, Mom. He sprinkled the flow powder, and the flames immediately turned a green color. Vader suppressed his instinctive fear of flames and walked in as if he was used to it. The flames surrounded him like warm breath. Through the firelight, Wade saw the remaining panic in his father's eyes. It is the uneasiness and fear caused by a stranger suddenly breaking into a harbor that one always thought was safe. Alpenia Garden, Wade said clearly as he looked at his father. In an instant, both parents and the living room disappeared from sight. He rotated rapidly in the green flames, and countless fireplaces flashed by quickly. Vader immediately closed his eyes. When he was spinning so dizzy, the extremely fast rotation suddenly stopped again, and when Vader was about to fall, a pair of strong arms supported him. It's not a good feeling, is it? A voice said, I heard that this is your first time using the Flow network. The man pulled him out of the fireplace. Wade coughed twice, rubbed away the cigarette ashes that accidentally got into his eyes, and saw a big man standing in front of him. He was very tall, about 2 meters tall, with a burly build and a somewhat fierce appearance, but his eyes looked gentle when he bent down to look at him. Ahem, sorry, who are you? Wade asked. A water glass was passed in front of him. Drink some water. The big man took out his wand and used clean up, and the dust on Vader's body immediately disappeared. He said, I am Stephen Murray, the son of Terrence Murray. My father was originally waiting for you here, but a friend from France has just arrived, and he wants to greet him. You can just walk around first, eat something. Stephen was probably given the task by his father to entertain the guest at the party, that is, Wade. He had been accompanying the little wizard and did not seem impatient. However, the huge height difference between the two sides obviously made the guests who saw them feel very funny. From time to time, someone looked at them and laughed. Stephen pretended not to see anything and accompanied Wade to visit the Alsophila garden. The garden was neat and tidy, and the long pale yellow table was filled with a variety of food and drinks for the guests to take. The party was held around a fountain. In the center of the fountain was a mermaid statue, a very beautiful mermaid in the legend, with a graceful figure and a glittering fish tail, and a moving chanting from her mouth. There were also small dancer statues on the stone railings around them. They danced tirelessly, and small golden light balls were spinning and splashing around. Wade reached out and gently touched a light ball. It was punctured like a bubble, and his fingers felt a little cool. The green grass around was freshly trimmed, like a layer of green and fluffy carpet. Various kinds of flowers are planted around the fountain and in the flower beds. The clusters of blooming flowers are crowded together, which looks particularly gorgeous. Some flowers can only be seen in spring and summer, but they bloom here regardless of the season. On both sides of the road, some tall trees with crowns like giant umbrellas are planted. This is the origin of the name of Althea Garden, Althea. Stephen proudly introduced this plant to him. Their history can be traced back to at least 200 million years ago, earlier than dinosaurs. They are real living fossils. The Mori family has a house elf who is responsible for taking care of these Althea trees. Halfway through the tour, a paper crane flew over and suddenly opened its mouth to speak the voice of Professor Mori. Stephen, bring Wade to the small stone platform. Okay, Stephen responded, and the paper crane landed on his shoulder and suddenly tilted his head, as if looking at Wade next to him. Stephen saw Wade staring at the paper crane and smiled and said, this is my father's work. He once went to Japan to exchange ideas with the magic school and found that the students there liked to fold these small paper cranes. After returning, he began to use paper cranes to send messages. Later, the Ministry of Magic introduced it, but they thought paper cranes were too troublesome, so they changed to paper airplanes. They are neither flexible, nor can they speak, nor are they beautiful. The only advantage is that they are very cheap. Ministry of Magic. Wade thought for a moment and asked, so what did they use to send messages before paper airplanes? Two-way mirrors are too expensive, it can't be the Flow network, right? Use owls, Stephen said with a smile. You can imagine, dozens of owls flying around the office, are filling the elevator, with feces and feathers everywhere. I saw it once when I was a child, it was a disaster. Wade finally understood why he unconsciously looked down on the Ministry of Magic in his tone. Anyone who has seen those officials being troubled by owl feces would probably not respect them. The small stone platform is a small garden with a foundation 2 or 3 feet higher. There are white marble steps, lavender peach leaf bell-shaped flowers fluttering in the wind, delphiniums and geraniums scattered around, and mosses crawling on the brick walls. The air is particularly fresh and pleasant. In addition to Professor Murray, there are only 5 or 6 people in the garden, all of whom are dressed gorgeously and look prominent. They heard the sound and turned their heads to look over. Everyone's actions were very consistent. They first saw the tall Stephen, and then their eyes fell down together and found Wade, who looked like a dwarf compared to the former. "Oh, Wade, my child." Professor Murray came over happily, completely ignoring his real child. He directly put his hand on Wade's shoulder and took him to the crowd. "This is my new student this year, a real student, Wade Gray." Everyone nodded and smiled at Wade. A man with brown curly hair complimented, "It seems that this child must be gifted to be appreciated by you at such a young age." Professor Murray nodded and said, "He is only in the 1st grade, but his alchemy level has surpassed yours when you graduate, Marchione." Others laughed. Obviously everyone knew that although this man named Marchione took alchemy as an elective, his level was really not very good. It was probably a headache for Professor Murray when he was in school. Marchione smiled and was not embarrassed. He looked at Wade seriously. Professor Murray seemed to think that the previous sentence was not convincing, so he immediately gave another example. This child relied on self-study to memorize the entire contents of Magic Pronunciation Table, Magic Symbol Collection, Runic Dictionary, and Ancient Magic Simple Introduction. It only took 2 months. Wow, now everyone finally understood the weight of gifted talent. They had basically taken ancient magic classes and even alchemy classes, and they knew how difficult it was to remember those crooked symbols and weird syllables. If nothing else, at least this child has surpassed 99% of people in memory and diligence. Not only that, Professor Murray dragged out his tone, with pride, deliberately putting the most important part at the end, and several people cooperated to make a very interested listening posture. Wade observed silently. Although he didn't know the identities of these people, it was obvious that he had seen Professor Murray's status very clearly. "He has only been studying with me for more than a month, and he has already made his first work. I swear, he did it completely on his own, and I didn't point out a single letter." Professor Murray showed off loudly, as if revealing the winning lottery numbers, and slowly took out a brand new book of friends, let it hang in the middle of everyone, and asked with a smile, "Can anyone guess it?" Purpose. Book of Friends. Several people looked at each other, gathered around the Friends tent in an orderly manner, and took out their wands to check. The Friends tent was shrouded in various lights over and over again. However, Professor Murray added a protective spell to this Book of Friends, and ordinary detection spells cannot detect the magical structure in it. 2 people soon gave up. They were not interested in a child at all, and they didn't think he would make any powerful alchemy products. They were just touting him to please Professor Murray. The rest of the people examined it for a while. The man named Marchione's eyes suddenly lit up. He picked off a leaf and turned it into a quill, and wrote a line of words on the paper. "Money is a bottomless sea, I want to swim in it." Then he turned back quickly, and the more he turned, the more fanatical he looked. The people around him didn't take it seriously at first, and then gradually their eyes widened and they kept swallowing. Professor Murray showed a smile that said, "Everything is under control." "No, sir, this number is not good. It's a bit too much. Professor, please consider me, business is not good now, can we share some profits? It's just the idea that is clever, but it's easy to copy. You should know how rampant piracy is. If the cost is too high, people would rather buy fakes. I can't make much money. Two-way mirrors and flow powder can replace its function. It may not be as popular as you think. We are just testing the waters at the beginning. No one knows how it will sell. If you ask too high, I can only give up." The crowd surrounded Professor Murray, talking one after another, as if they were besieging him. When Marchione started to quote, Wade was finally sure that Professor Murray's party was actually a new product launch for his Book of Friends. No wonder he didn't let Wade sell the Book of Friends himself at school. If the information of similar products was leaked in advance, it might not have achieved the results today. And Wade can only earn a little pocket money from students by doing small things at school. How can he compare with the efficiency of these multinational companies? Each of these strange wizards in the small garden can be called the head of a multinational company. Because of the existence of the flow network and the portkey, it is much easier for wizards to cross different countries than muggles. And with the traceless extension spell, the cost of logistics and transportation can be ignored, so wizards can easily sell goods to different countries and even different continents. Wade followed Professor Murray and watched him argue with these wizards about how much the patent license for the Friends book should pay. Someone proposed to buy it out directly with 100,000 galleons and was almost kicked out by Professor Murray. He raised it all the way to 200,000 galleons, but Professor Murray insisted on not agreeing and was only willing to sell the right to use it. At this time, these wizards no longer flattered and respected Professor Murray before, but negotiated with great care. Some pestered, some were picky, some pretended to give up, and some began to play the emotional card, but Professor Murray was like a stone pillar in the river hit by water from all directions and was not shaken at all. He started by asking for an incredibly high price, and then bargained with these people little by little, constantly showing the advantages of the Book of Friends. Fast, convenient, low price, wizards all over the world will buy it, and will buy it repeatedly throughout their lives. Do you know how beautiful and stable its structure is? Counterfeit items will not have the stability of the Book of Friends at all. If you don't believe it, try it yourself. Your transformation spell may be ineffective if it exceeds 50 meters, and it is impossible to transmit complex information. Some people saw that they couldn't convince Professor Murray, so they simply bypassed him and came to Wade. But Wade just smiled and didn't say anything, as if he was shy, hiding behind Professor Murray. He knew that at the age of 11, there was no need to be so smooth, mature, and sharp, just leave everything to adults. And he also knew his own limitations, because if it was just Wade himself, he might have directly agreed to the 100,000 galleons buyout price. After all, before this, Wade's best idea for Friends book was to earn a few hundred or 1,000 galleons from his classmates at Hogwarts, and that would require him to make a large number of Friends books in the dormitory day and night, like an assembly line worker. But now, he was about to sit on the capitalist's table. Of course, the decision-making power was handed over because the adult in front of him was trustworthy and would really consider him. Wade looked up and looked at Professor Murray, who was firing on all cylinders for him. The old man's thin back was like a tall cliff, and Wade's eyes were a little confused and complicated. Seeing Wade being entangled, his eyes were blank and a little pitiful. Professor Murray waved his hand and asked Stephen to take Wade out to play and not get in the way here, and then he rolled up his sleeves, looking like he was busy fighting. Stephen, who was as quiet as a plant and was once again classified as a child. He hesitated to speak, but finally closed his mouth and obediently took Wade away. After leaving, he couldn't help but sigh deeply. If you have something to do, you can go first, I can just find a place to read. Wade looked at him and said sympathetically, "Who would like to play with children? He himself doesn't like it." "No, it's not because of you." Stephen was dejected and didn't want to say it, but under Wade's gaze, he slowly expressed his troubles. "I'm already 36 years old, and my father still always treats me as a child. In fact, I want to follow Mr. Scamander's footsteps, travel around the world, and be a magical zoologist. But my parents don't want to let me go far away, saying it's too dangerous." Wade looked at him puzzledly. "But they didn't put you under house arrest. A man in his 30s, and a wizard, can't he leave if he wants to?" "If I leave without saying goodbye, my mother will be so sad. My father will definitely be angry," Stephen said worriedly. "I still hope to get their understanding and support, otherwise I won't dare to come back after I leave." Wade was speechless. He didn't expect that Professor Murray's son looked like a bear, but had a soft personality like a rabbit. He thought for a while and asked, "Why don't you write a letter to Mr. Scamander?" "Write a letter? Right, what letter? I heard that Mr. Scamander has many magical animals himself. Maybe you can ask him to provide you with a job as a breeder. The salary is not important. What is important is that you can learn about magical animals from Mr. Scamander. If one day, you can deal with various magical animals as calmly as that gentleman, Professor Murray should be able to let you travel with confidence, right? Wade thought of the magical box in Scamander's hand that had multiple environments and climate changes, and felt envious from the bottom of his heart. Yes, why didn't I think of this method? Stephen was overjoyed. He was happy for a while, but hesitant. Then how should I write this letter? Will it be offensive? He asked seriously with anxiety, even though the person in front of him was just a child. Just tell the truth, Wade suggested. Write down your worries and ideals, as well as your understanding of magical animals. This way, even if Mr. Scamander disagrees, he won't be angry about it. I just don't know if Mr. Scamander will think that the letter was written by a fresh graduate just by looking at the tone and wording of the letter. When they first met, Wade thought he was a very strong man, then he found him gentle and calm, but after getting along for a while, he felt that his true character was like a child, even simpler than many children. No wonder Professor Murray didn't dare to let him go out. If it was his own son, Wade wouldn't dare to let him go around the world alone. Although Stephen couldn't wait to write the letter, and Wade said it was okay to be alone, Stephen still did not put aside his duties and ran away. He and Wade discussed the wording of the letter for a while, and then started talking about the magical creatures he had raised. Although Professor Murray did not agree to allow him to travel to places where dangerous magical creatures lived, he did not completely reject Stephen's dream. Stephen has owned a farm since graduating from Hogwarts, and he has raised many cuties there over the years. Vader knew that Hagrid at Hogwarts liked to raise all kinds of dangerous creatures, such as fire dragons and so on, and called them cute little animals. He thought that Stephen was also like this, but after learning more about it, he realized that they were really cute and basically harmless magical creatures, such as ball escapers, soundless birds, velvets, fairies, swallow-tailed dogs, etc., the most dangerous of which is a bird snake. This creature can expand and contract its size at will, becoming as huge as a dragon, but it feeds on insects, birds and rats. I have always wanted to raise a growling, Stephen said. Did you know? It is a type of Pegasus. Growling can fly and run faster than the wind. But except for the mythical Sigurd, no one has ever tamed the growling. Is this Pegasus difficult to tame? They are very free animals, yearning for freedom and unwilling to be restrained, Stephen said, and then talked about other Pegasus, the Thestral from Hogwarts, the Rune Horse from Beauxbatons, and the fire-breathing Pegasus Izarin. Some wizards look down upon any magical creatures other than wizards, viewing them as inferior animals. But Stephen was fascinated by it, and there were so many kinds of creatures. Wade felt that he had learned a lot just by chatting with him. Suddenly the arrival of a person interrupted their conversation. It was a blonde wizard who was at the small stone platform before. With a look of decadence and frustration on his face, he came over to say hello to Stephen, then looked at Wade, steeled himself and smiled. Mr. Grieg, it's a pity that we don't have the opportunity to cooperate this time. I hope that next time you have any new works, please contact me and I will definitely give you a price that satisfies you. He handed over a business card with the wizard's name and contact address written on it. Stephen raised his eyebrows and lost his smile. His originally honest and gentle expression suddenly looked a little cold. Wade took the business card and said with a smile, I hope I can have this opportunity in the future. The blonde wizard relaxed a little and hurriedly said goodbye. You're not really going to cooperate with him, are you? He called you by the wrong last name, Stephen said unhappily. Yeah, he called him by the wrong name. Wade put away the business card and said, but it doesn't matter, because I don't intend to remember him. As if the blonde wizard had turned on some switch, two more wizards came to say goodbye one after another. They said the same thing before leaving and left their business cards to Vader. But this time, they finally remembered Vader's full name. After they left, Stephen introduced in a low voice to Wade. Don't cooperate with Bolton. He seems to be easy to talk to, but in fact he is shady and often manipulates contracts. He just doesn't dare to trick my father. In other words, it would be easy for Vader to suffer a loss if he dealt with him. A wizard with a middle-parted head and a beard came to say goodbye, holding a conspicuous black cane in his hand. Mr. Gray, I really appreciate your talent. Unfortunately, Professor Murray and I have big differences on price. I hope we can keep in touch and new opportunities may arise in the future. Of course, thank you for the time and energy you invested in this, Wade said, taking his business card. Cyrus Sharp, this is the name of the wizard. Sharp is a very capable person, and he can always get all kinds of hard-to-get things, including a lot of contraband. I heard that he went to Azkaban 3 times when he was young. My father actually doesn't like him very much, but sometimes I buy things from him, Steven said later. Can you come out after entering Azkaban? Vader was surprised. In his impression, Azkaban was an isolated island in the vast ocean, a prison with no entrance and no exit. Steven misunderstood what Wade meant and explained. Well, because he is very cunning and good at covering up his crimes, each sentence is no more than half a year. Oh, well, that's it. After hearing this, Vader knew that he had made a fool. The movie only played Death Eaters who were sentenced to life imprisonment, which did not mean that Azkaban only had life imprisonment as a punishment. The wizards left one after another, and finally only Marchione was left walking out of the small stone platform, complaining loudly as he walked. Dear Professor Murray, I used to be your student, but now I feel that I am a little bit different. I have never received your preference. Of course, I am not complaining. I just want to tell you that even if I leave school now, I will always respect your decision and hope that you can give me a little attention and care. He made a very small gap with his thumb and forefinger to show how humble his request was. Come on, when have you ever suffered a loss? Professor Murray said angrily. Indeed, although Marchione was complaining, the corners of his mouth could not be controlled and raised with a proud expression on his face. He walked up to Wade with easy and quick steps, took off his hat and bowed, and said with a smile, "This is the first time we meet, Mr. Wade Gray. Please allow me to introduce myself. I am Marco Marchione. I am engaged in the trading of various types of magic items. I believe that meeting you today must be a blessing, and I look forward to establishing a deep friendship with you and bringing more good changes to the wizarding world in the future, earn more money." Hello. Wade was startled by his exaggerated movements and subconsciously looked at Professor Murray. Professor Murray nodded and directly stated the final result. Marchione is willing to pay 50,000 galleons to obtain the technical authorization for the Book of Friends. At the same time, for every gallon he earns using the Book of Friends in the future, he will pay you 3 ACK. Marchione's bright smile suddenly became a little stiff. Obviously, although this price could still make him a lot of money, he felt heartbroken and frustrated when he thought that he might not have to pay so much. So he kept mumbling again, scolding Professor Murray for being too partial to Wade, and completely taking advantage of him as a poor businessman. Professor Murray remained unmoved, as if Marchione's voice was just a fly buzzing next to him. He quickly made a contract and served as a witness to urge Marchione and Wade to make the contract. The advantage of the magical world is that there is no need to worry about business partners breaking their contracts, because the price paid for breaking a contract is often more terrible than death. Marchione was a man who was passionate about the pursuit of wealth, and he was always very explicit about it. After signing the contract, Marchione urged to take the next step immediately. He was not willing to waste a second of making money. This time, Professor Murray asked Steven to entertain the guests at the party while he accompanied Wade to Marchione's magic workshop. It's best to put the first batch of goods on the shelves before the start of school. Students and their parents will definitely be willing to empty their wallets to buy our goods. Marchione said enthusiastically. We can also launch different packaging in different quantities, different qualities. Even if it is just to add some printing on parchment and sprinkle some gold powder, the pure blood nobles are willing to pay 3 times the price. By the way, I have to rush to make a batch of posters and put them up tomorrow morning. Go to Diagon Alley. Wade couldn't help but be speechless and asked, "Is it too late?" Of course. Marchione blinked. Dear Vader, the world of magic is omnipotent. Vader thought he had some magical spell that could speed up production, but when he used flow powder to get to Marchione's company, he discovered that it was the power of money. The company hall is very spacious, with a small flowing waterfall in the center, and the large characters, Aslan's magic workshop, shine in gold above the water waves. The arched dome is painted with pictures of various magical creatures, some of which are still moving slowly. There were burning fireplaces all around, with green flames rising and falling, and wizards coming out of them from time to time. Why are you suddenly notified that you have to work overtime during the Christmas holiday? A young man probably didn't notice that his boss was also nearby and complained loudly, I was planning to travel to Italy. I heard that there are products that need to be produced urgently. Another witch said with joy, overtime pay will be 3 times the usual rate. The short-haired young man immediately calmed down. That's it, that's not bad. Give way, please give way. A goblin shouted loudly, directing the box as high as a hill to move with difficulty. He moved slowly because there were many people in the hall, which made the goblin look very irritable. The sudden increase in work tasks made everything look messy, and there were also several house elves running between people's legs, running around quickly and delivering various things. Colorful paper airplanes were hovering in groups over the hall. From time to time, when they spotted a person, they would plunge down from above with a whooshing sound. Oh, a wizard suddenly wore a paper airplane on his hat. He took off the airplane and unfolded it to take a look, and immediately shouted, "Why did I just find out now that there is not much oil in the stone scale fish? I said it long before the holiday. Check the inventory and replenish it promptly. Don't let me know who is neglecting their duties." He hurried through the crowd, almost knocking over the goblin, who was so angry that he dropped the box and cursed loudly. Wade was very surprised. Judging from the current messy state of the magic workshop, Marchione may have just ordered all employees to prepare to work overtime after seeing the effect of the Book of Friends. At that time, everyone still held out hope of negotiating with Professor Murray, but the situation was Marchione, who must win, may have already thought about how to carry out the follow-up work. Sorry, it's really messy here today. It's not usually like this. Vader, Professor, follow me, this way. Marchione led Wade and Professor Murray through the crowd and entered the special elevator. He breathed a sigh of relief, pressed the button for 6th floor, technical department, and loosened his collar at the same time. Your workshop now has 7 floors. Professor Murray squinted at the row of elevator buttons and said, I remember it was only 5 floors when I came here last time. Yes, we have developed well in the past few years. Marchione said proudly. The transformation of the magic radio is a big step, and this is also thanks to the professor's willingness to give us authorization. There are not many wizards who are willing to take the initiative to accept new things, let alone modify Muggle objects. Many people still think that Muggles are stupid, low-level creatures. They are really stupid. When I first went to school, I saw the Scarlet Train running like a giant beast in the Scottish Highlands. I was deeply shocked by the wisdom and power of Muggles. After graduating from school, I originally went to a Muggle university to study, but due to various reasons, I regretfully gave up. For various reasons, isn't it just because I don't understand? Professor Murray revealed the facts bitterly. Ha ha ha, don't speak so bluntly in front of children, Professor. Wade suddenly discovered that although Professor Murray often complained about Marchione, the relationship between them was much better than it seemed on the surface. When talking in private, there was a special tacit understanding. He looked at the posters on the elevator and listened silently without interrupting. There are 2 goblins and 5 or 6 wizards in the technical department. They have prepared various tools and are waiting in the office. This place is different from a Muggle office. There are all kinds of wonderful, slowly moving magical objects, lights of different colors flash from time to time, and the room is filled with many tiny sounds. When they arrived here, Professor Murray and Marchione found an empty table and sat down to drink tea while Wade communicated with the people in the technology department. Ved first demonstrated the production process of the Book of Friends. He brought ready-made potions that took a long time to prepare. All the people present were experts. They almost mastered the general process after watching it once. Then they disassembled the whole process step by step, and finally reached a point where more than 80% of the small steps could be completed even by third-year students at Hogwarts. Some people were constantly calculating how to further reduce the cost and find various materials for preparation. In less than half an hour, the technical department had determined the production process of the first batch of products, and the entire magic workshop really entered the stage of high-speed operation. During this time, although Marchione only occasionally chatted with Professor Murray in a low voice, he was also observing Ved without leaving any trace. The black-haired boy was not very tall. He rarely spoke after showing his work, but every time he spoke, he would speak meaningfully and to the point. The members of the technical department tried to change his magic rune circuit several times, but before they did it, he pointed out the consequences of doing so, either reducing stability or causing delays or even loss of transmitted information. As it turned out, He was right every time. Marchione secretly stuck out his tongue, finally understanding why Professor Murray had always looked down on his level. He had clearly scored an E good in the Ultimate Wizard registration exam. Look at this kid, he not only has genius creativity, a diligent attitude towards study, but also a very pragmatic and hardworking experimental spirit. If he had not tried dozens or hundreds of times, how could he know all the changes? No wonder Professor Murray, with his current status, is willing to give up his face to stand up for this kid and personally fight for greater benefits for him. There are many geniuses in the world, like flowing water, and Marchione himself is also called a genius by some people, so he understands even more. If many geniuses only have smart minds, they will be lost in the crowd as they grow up, and even go straight to Azkaban for further study because they are too smart. Only a genius like Wade, as long as he does not die halfway, his achievements are unquestionable, and his glory is obvious. How to win over such a genius? Marchione changed his strategy, which he had adjusted 3 times. 11 years old. Is this child really only 11 years old? It makes him feel as if he has lived on the body of a flobberworm for more than 30 years. Could it be? Suddenly, Marchione leaned forward and said in a low voice, Professor Murray, tell me the truth, this child is actually your illegitimate child, right? Wade, who was discussing the lead-powder ratio with the technical department, suddenly heard a scream. He turned around and saw that Marchione had rolled down from the table to the ground, and Professor Murray smiled and indicated that everything was fine. But for some reason, his smile was a little hideous. Wade blinked blankly. Aslan's magic workshop was indeed very efficient. When Wade went out, he already had the first edition of The Book of Friends in his hand. This is a preliminarily determined collection that is related to at least 2 people and at most 15 people. The cover is much more beautiful than Wade's handwriting. The font is bordered with gold and reflects the slightly swaying lisianthus. The internal pages use different colors and flowers to show the difference. For example, sunflowers for 2 people, tulips for 3 people, daylilies for 4 people, violets for 5 people, etc., are all flowers that can symbolize friendship. In Wade's opinion, this Book of Friends is already very exquisite, but Marchione is not too satisfied. This is the version for women, they should dust it with a little powder. Are there other versions? Vader asked. Of course. Marchione said. There are versions for men, which will be printed with pictures of green pine trees, crowns, scepters, bows and arrows. There are also animal versions, which will be printed with unicorns, phoenixes, fire dragons, and Pegasus. One category, the children's version, includes velvet and fairies. The novelty version includes dementors and 3-headed dogs. The Quidditch version will feature famous Quidditch stars and broomsticks, and there are also Buildings Edition, Vila Edition, Order of Merlin Edition, Academy Edition. He mentioned dozens of types in one go, as if he could come up with a lot of money-making ideas without even thinking. Finally, he said, there are all kinds of patterns to choose from. Many people will buy a few more books for collection even if they don't need them. Go back, but we currently have the most flower templates, so I'll make this one first. If you don't like it, you can give it to your female classmates. When other versions are printed, I'll give you a few sets. Wade shook his head. What do I need so much for? You can keep it yourself. Marchione said with a smile, it's also good to give it to classmates to get closer. I don't like to please other people. In other words, his life has not reached the point where he needs to please others to continue. This has been the case in his past and present lives. It's not a favor, but if someone does you a little favor, you can repay it with a friend's account. It doesn't need to be too much, just a set for 2 or 3 people. Marchione gave instructions like an elder brother. This thing costs almost nothing to you, but it is a relatively precious gift to others. You will be very happy if you receive it. Also, Vader. He touched Wade's soft hair and said, we are not a lone star in the night sky. There are always times when we need help from others. How can you get it if you don't give it first? Although what Marchione said makes sense, if it makes you feel embarrassed, then there is no need to imitate him. Professor Murray suddenly said, blindly imitating others will only make you lose your own judgment. All you need to do is just be good to yourself. A lone star is naturally lonely, but if it is the sun, there will naturally be stars around it. Quote. Well, maybe you were right, Professor. Marchione shrugged. But I always think that there is nothing wrong with having a good relationship with most people. You have been thinking about how to make money all day since the first grade, but Wade is not a businessman, he is an alchemist, enjoying loneliness, pursuing the unknown, and being in the company of knowledge. This is the character of an alchemist. Don't use your unscrupulous business practices have come to contaminate my students, Professor Murray said unhappily. Hey, you are slandering, Professor. Marchione protested, and immediately gave an example. If I really do whatever it takes to make money, then I should ask the technical department to adjust the use period of the Friends account to 1 year later. Users would have to buy new ones every year, so that the gold galleons would really continue to flow. But I didn't do that, which proves that even though I'm doing business, I still have noble moral character. But you must have thought about it, right? Otherwise you wouldn't blurt out such a vicious method. It's not illegal if you think about it. Their next stop was naturally Gringotts. It was already evening, and there were very few wizards shopping in Diagon Alley. Instead, some sneaky guys in black robes began to appear. Almost all of them walked into a dark and gloomy alley. Don't look over there. That's Nocturne Alley, the favorite haunt of dark wizards. Marchione blocked Vader's view, and at the same time wrapped his arms in wide sleeves. Vader's whole body was almost covered by him, while Professor Murray walked on the other side of him. Several people arrived at Gringotts smoothly, and an elf standing near the door bowed to them. Good evening, gentlemen. Good evening. Marchione extended his hand and said, Mr. Wade Grey needs to rent a new vault. Wade Grey. The goblin looked up at Vader, who was almost half a head taller than him. He did not question his age, but nodded and said, Okay, I understand, which one should I rent? Plant a treasury. Please introduce the types and prices to Mr. Grey first. Please come over here. Wade followed the goblin and Marchione to go through the treasury procedures, while Professor Murray came to another goblin who was sitting on a high stool writing. Long time no see, Griphook. Hello, Professor Murray, is there anything I can do for you? The goblin named Griphook said respectfully. I want to get something from my vault. Professor Murray showed the key. Okay, wait a minute, I'll get the jingle. The goblins imprisoned a fire dragon in the underground vault to deal with those with bad intentions. The jingle piece allows the goblins and customers to travel safely through the vault. The first time Wade got on the legendary trolley, Michael once described it to him, as if it was going to knock your brains out. The stroller looks narrow, small, and very simple, but it is not crowded even if it seats 2 adults, a child, and 2 goblins. The pull ring flicked the armrest connected to the front of the car, and the cart clicked away. Close your eyes and don't open your mouth. Marchione seized the moment and shouted to Wade. Wade didn't ask stupid questions and immediately complied. The trolley slid down the steep slope, getting faster and faster, and gradually you could hear the icy wind whistling past you. The road in the middle must be particularly winding, because their bodies are involuntarily swaying left and right, as if they are trying to throw people away. Fortunately, he kept his eyes closed, and the dizziness was greatly reduced. Marchione's arm was firmly stuck in front of his chest, as if adding a safety lever to him. After an unknown amount of time, the cart finally stopped. At this time, several people's faces were already pale, and they held on to the railing for a while before Wade and Marchione could climb out of the car. As for Professor Murray, he still needs to go further down to get something from his vault. Okay, let's set off. Griphook said, turning the lever on the trolley again. Another goblin named Color was standing on the roadside, with a 317 sign hanging on the vault door next to him. He held the bronze key with his slender fingers, inserted it into the keyhole and turned it a few times. The chain suddenly came alive and crawled around, and the vault door opened. Wade stood at the door and looked inside. The empty vault was like a huge cave, with not even a weed in it. This will be your vault from now on, Mr. Wade Grey. Cooler handed him the key and said, please be sure to keep your key. Wade took the key, which had a slender silver chain on it, just enough for him to hang around his neck. A bit empty, isn't it? Marchione said with a smile, and then signed a document and handed it to Color. Transfer 50,000 galleons from my vault to vault number 317. Cooler took it expressionlessly and said, okay, please wait a moment. It seemed that within just a few breaths, a tinkling sound suddenly sounded in my ears. Vader was looking for the source of the sound when he suddenly saw tens of thousands of galleons falling from the sky, like a heavy rain in the vault. They hit the ground with a clanging sound, forming a golden hill, shining with dazzling golden light under the torch. Marchione smiled and said, "One day, this place will be filled with gold galleons, right? Mr. Cooler, can you just take galleons out of your vault?" While waiting for Professor Murray in the hall, Wade asked Marchione softly. "Don't worry." Marchione knew what he was thinking and whispered in a low voice. "Goblins, they can put galleons into the vault, but they cannot take it out casually, unless authorized by the owner of the vault. The Ministry of Magic is here. We made a contract with the goblins a long time ago, a very ancient and powerful contract. It is precisely because goblins will never steal from others that people are accustomed to storing precious things in Gringotts. But I heard that Gringotts was broken into this summer." Vader thought of a certain news report that he had heard someone mention. Yes, that's what happened. The goblin Griphook, who came over with Professor Murray, heard what Vader said and immediately emphasized with emphasis, but he didn't steal anything. Gringotts is still the safest place in the wizarding world. Professor Murray, who went to get something, still had his hands empty, and Marchione didn't ask any questions. After walking out of the gate of Gringotts, he said to the two of them, "Sorry, Professor, Vader, I have to arrange new products as soon as possible. It's only been a few days since school started, and there's still a lot of business to coordinate." Professor Murray nodded. "Go and do your work, Marchione. See you next time, Mr. Marchione." Wade also said goodbye. Marchione bowed with his hat in one hand and walked away in a hurry. Wade saw that the direction he was heading seemed to be the offices of the Daily Prophet, although he had sighed in his heart several times. At this moment he could not bear to. He couldn't help but say it again. Mr. Marchione is really a man who counts every second. As long as it has something to do with money, he is always more active than anyone else. Professor Murray said as he led Wade down the steps, "But he is a very good businessman. I am not saying that he is better than others. He is more honest, but he has a longer-term vision than others and can spend several years or even more than 10 years building a foundation in order to obtain greater benefits." He looked at Wade with admiration and said, "If you are already 30 or 40 years old, and you accidentally create the Book of Friends with a flash of inspiration, then I have to advise you to be careful. Maybe Marchione will try his best to use it from you. Have more profit in your hands, but you are only 11 years old." He paused and smiled inexplicably. Wade guessed, "If you were younger, wouldn't it be easier to be deceived?" "No, Vader," Professor Murray said with emotion. "You are young, this is your current weakness, but it is also your strength. Marchione, like me, believes in your potential and looks forward to your success. The future will shine brightly. Therefore, he will help you as much as possible now, dedicate time, resources and energy, and even be willing to give up some additional benefits to support your growth, hoping that you can bring him greater rewards in the future." Wade frowned slightly. Professor Murray did not lower his head to look at him, but seemed to know what he was thinking. He smiled and said, "Unhappy? Do you think he is too realistic?" "Not unhappy." Wade did not admit it, but said, "I understand that most relationships between people come from being needed and used, but Mr. Marchione is very enthusiastic. It's hard to accept that his inner considerations are so." He hesitated, not knowing how to describe the contrast euphemistically. Professor Murray smiled and said, "Cold. Do you take practical interests too seriously?" Wade nodded silently. Professor Murray said, "Veed, the most terrifying thing in this world is not being used, because, being used, is also the recognition of your talents and value. People who have no use value at all are sad, just like a speck of dust. No one cares whether it disappears or exists, so don't be afraid or hate the idea of others trying to take advantage of you. You must learn to use your talents, overcome obstacles, and use this resource in this relationship of interests and needs. Promote your own growth, but you must keep a clear mind and protect your own interests. Don't become a tool for others, but be your own master." He lowered his head and saw the boy's gray eyes looking at him seriously. Although he didn't speak, Murray knew that the boy would definitely take his words to heart and think and learn attentively. A complex current surged in his heart. On the one hand, Terrence Murray has the satisfaction and joy of sharing wisdom and experience, and watching students grow from ignorance to knowledge, from immaturity to maturity. On the other hand, he felt that he seemed to be transmitting the cruelty, ruthlessness and complexity of adult society to innocent children. He was worried that the children would take the wrong path due to negative influences, and he suddenly felt remorse and guilt in his heart. So Professor Murray changed the topic and said in a relaxed tone, "But, these are too far away for you, so don't think about it for the time being. Just remember, don't promise anything easily. If you don't know what to do, whatever you want to do, just come to me." Professor Murray made a promise that he would never utter. "Thank you, Professor." Wade raised his head and asked, "You have given me a lot of help since we met, and I am really grateful. How can I repay you?" "Then, please continue to maintain your enthusiasm for learning and your unremitting desire to explore the unknown, Mr. Gray," Professor Murray said with a smile. "For a professor, what else is better than seeing yourself? What about better rewards for your hard work?" Professor Murray used the Flow network to send Wade back home again. However, because the acquaintances of the Flow network administration had already gone home from work, they could not temporarily connect the Gray family's fireplace to the network. They could only fly to the nearby area first and then walk slowly over. "Professor, I heard that apparition can instantly transfer to another place," Wade asked, patting the soot on his hair. "Why do we use the Flow network?" "Because apparition is not a suitable way to travel with children," Professor Murray said gently. "This is a profound and dangerous magic. If you are not careful, it will cause catastrophic consequences. Children are especially vulnerable, so when we don't need to escape, we should choose a safer means of transportation." It was late when they got home. The Grays were worried, one looking at the door and the other guarding in front of the fireplace. Fiona, who was standing in front of the window, saw the two people, one big and one small, walking slowly, and she screamed in surprise, holding up her skirt and rushed out of the door. Professor Murray stopped, looked at Wade and smiled. "Child, you have experienced a lot today, you must be very tired. Although as a teacher I should not say this, but, go home and have a good rest, don't read tonight, okay?" "Yes, Professor," Wade said respectfully and gratefully. Seeing that the two still had something to say, the Grays stopped at the door and waited for them to finish their words. Then finally, "Because your first work made me very satisfied, I want to give you a small reward." Professor Murray took out a very small box from his pocket and handed it to Wade. Wade immediately guessed that this was what he had specially taken from Gringotts. How valuable must something be for Professor Murray to put in the vault? He didn't know, but subconsciously refused. "No, Professor, I don't refuse, Wade." Professor Murray stuffed the box into his hand without saying anything, and said, "This is not just a reward, but also a test. Use it well, Wade." "So, your parchment," Ferdinand said palely. "Friend's account, dear, it's friend's account." Fiona corrected him dissatisfiedly. How could her son's outstanding and great invention be simply referred to as parchment? "Okay, book of friends," Ferdinand corrected, staring at Wade with his eyes wide open. "After selling the patent, they gave you 50,000 galleons, and there will be a steady stream of patent royalties in the future." There was something wrong with his demeanor, which made Wade, who was originally happy, a little uneasy. His expression subconsciously became serious, and he said seriously, "Yes, Father. There are even people who want to buy it out with 200,000 galleons, but your professor didn't agree." "Yes." Ferdinand looked like he was having difficulty breathing and said, "You followed your professor." "Professor Murray." "Yes, it was Professor Murray, and a businessman, who went to Diagon Alley. It was Mr. Marco Marchoni." Wade pondered for a moment and said, "They all took good care of me. And then in front of you, and a goblin, he transferred all 50,000 gold galleons." "Yes, Father." Ferdinand's expression was too strange, not like he was simply proud or happy for him. Wade was a little nervous. It was only then that he thought that he should have asked his parents for their opinions, but under Marchioni's urging, everything today seemed to be accelerated, and he subconsciously ignored it. Logically speaking, Professor Murray and Marchioni were not such careless people. But considering that his parents did not know magic, perhaps in their eyes, although Wade was only 11 years old, he was the only one in the Gray family who could communicate and make decisions on an equal footing. Realizing this made Wade feel a little uncomfortable. He suppressed these emotions and tried to speak in a relaxed tone. "Because school is about to start, Mr. Marchione is very anxious and afraid of missing this opportunity to make money, so everything seems very hasty. Sorry, Dad, I forgot that I should come back to discuss it with you first. Okay, Wade is only 11 years old, do you still ask him to do everything well? Fiona pretended to be unhappy and pushed Ferdinand away, then hugged her son and kissed his forehead very hard. Great, baby. Mom is so proud of you. How many 11-year-olds? The child can achieve financial freedom by himself. And it is your exclusive patent. It's so shocking. I can't believe I can give birth to such an excellent son. Quote. She kissed him, then pulled Wade up from the sofa and urged him, what are you waiting for? Come and have dinner, I made a big meal. Ferdy, you go wash your hands too. Okay. Wade, who was pushed to the dining table, turned his head and saw Ferdinand standing up with the back of the sofa. He even staggered and almost fell when he walked to the bathroom. Fiona didn't see it. She hummed a song and happily opened the lid. The aroma of the food immediately awakened the taste buds of several people. But Ferdinand couldn't eat the whole time. He almost poked the tomato into his nostrils. After the steak on the fork fell off, he chewed it for a few times before he found it. Your father is so shocked. Fiona was worried that Wade would feel frustrated or disappointed, and whispered to him, when he was 11 years old, he couldn't even figure out addition and subtraction within 100. This is too exaggerated. Wade couldn't help but smile, for the non-existent, clumsy father in his mother's mouth, and for the love shining in his mother's eyes. Dad, after dinner, Wade asked tentatively, Professor Mori helped me a lot today. Although he said he didn't need it, I still want to thank him, but I don't know how to do it. According to some hidden rules of the workplace he learned in his previous life, it is appropriate to take out 20,000 or 30,000 galleons to a noble man, like Professor Mori at this time, otherwise it would be ignorant. But Wade hesitated for a long time, and still felt that if he said so, Professor Mori might turn his face on the spot. The past experience cannot be applied to the present, at least not to Professor Mori, otherwise it is hard to say whether it is thank you or insult. As an 11-year-old child, Wade knew that he didn't need to be too sophisticated or too smooth. But Wade didn't think it was possible for him to accept Professor Murray's kindness as if nothing had happened. Oh, Ferdinand was a little stunned, and after a long while he said, write a thank you letter, Wade. Write a letter. Wade didn't expect that his suggestion to Stephen during the day was to write a letter, and this suggestion was sent back by his father at night. Yes, write a letter, be sincere and attentive. Ferdinand thought for a while and said, on Professor Murray's birthday or holidays, remember to send a small gift, the most important thing is to repay with better grades. I understand. Wade nodded. Well, go write a letter, Wade. And, Ferdinand smiled with some difficulty, I am very proud of you, son. Watching his son return to his bedroom, Ferdinand sat down with his palms inserted into his hair, looking particularly depressed. What happened to you today? Fiona hugged him from behind, resting her head on his neck, her long hair sliding down her shoulders. She muttered in dissatisfaction. The little invention Wade made sold a lot of money, the professor at the school was so nice to him, and the businessmen he met were honest and enthusiastic. Everything was fine. Why do you look like this? Wade didn't even smile when he returned to the room. Ferdinand, no matter what the reason, don't be a parent who will spoil the fun, okay? She muttered to herself, feeling her husband's tense muscles gradually relax. Yes, you are right. Ferdinand held his wife's hand and tried to smile. Their professor is a good person. Everything is fine. I was too shocked, sorry. I'm fine, remember to apologize to Wade tomorrow morning. He happily shared his achievements with you, but you didn't even give him a good face. Got it. Late at night, when his wife was completely asleep, Ferdinand put on his clothes and went to the balcony. He wanted to light a cigarette, but his hands were shaking so badly that he failed several times. After finally lighting the cigarette, he took a deep breath. The smoke blurred his eyes in the lonely London at night. It was not until this moment that the overwhelming fear completely overwhelmed Ferdinand. His Wade, his smart, sensible, well-behaved and kind son, his brain was worth at least £1 million, and he had a huge fortune that could be cashed in at any time. He followed some strangers to a completely unfamiliar place. If Wade was in danger, if he was hurt, what could he do as a father? The wizard came and went without a trace, and Ferdinand didn't even know where to find him. He smoked one cigarette after another, and his body was trembling from fingers to toes. This night was so cold that it made people shiver. Upstairs, Wade watched the smoke drift away in wisps, and also saw the faint firelight flickering again and again. He leaned on the railing, raised his head slightly, and saw the waning moon like a silver hook hanging on the top of a tall building. The last week of the holiday went by so fast. Wade felt that he had only read a few books, but time had already slipped away. Professor Murray left him a small matchbox, which contained a small piece of curled, blue-black thin film, like a dried caterpillar or a wing membrane torn from a bat's wing. Because he could not use a magic wand, Wade only observed its appearance with a magnifying glass, and did not use more destructive monitoring methods. He could only study it carefully after he arrived at school. As he said, Marchione really made the Book of Friends go on sale as scheduled. Wade also received an invitation letter for the release date of Aslan's Magic Workshop, and the owl sent him samples. There were 2 sets of each style, and it was noted that he could keep one set and give the other set to others. Compared with joining in the excitement of the first day of release, Wade preferred to read books at home. However, Fiona saw the advertisement of the Book of Friends in the Daily Prophet and wanted to go there with great interest, so the father and son accompanied her. The family drove to Charing Cross Road in Westminster, parked the car nearby, and then walked to the Leaky Cauldron. It had just snowed recently, and the ground was wet and slippery. Fiona held Ferdinand's arm tightly, and her feet were still slipping when she walked. "I really want to fly to the Leaky Cauldron, drink some butterbeer, no, fire whiskey," Fiona muttered as she walked tremblingly. "It's almost there," Ferdinand comforted her. In fact, they had already seen the sign of the Leaky Cauldron. As squibs, the Grey couple did not accept them as students in the magic school, but the wizarding world did not completely close the door to them. Ferdinand and Fiona both have magic in their bodies. Although they cannot use it, it also makes them different from muggles. For example, they can see the Leaky Cauldron, which does not exist in the eyes of muggles, and potions can also have normal effects on them. If they were pure muggles, some potions that were common to wizards would turn into deadly poisons when they drank them, such as the bone spirit. Some injuries that were not worth mentioning to wizards would be irreparable and serious injuries to muggles. When Wade was in Hogwarts, the Greys would sometimes wander around Diagon Alley. Although they did not have wands, they could enter Diagon Alley as long as they followed other wizards when they opened the entrance, and others would generally not say anything. At this time, Wade felt that his parents were like returning home after entering Diagon Alley. Naturally, they first drank a beer at the Leaky Cauldron. I don't know when Fiona no longer disliked the hygiene here, and then followed the winding path to the entrance, all looking at Wade. Wade took out his wand and knocked on a brick on the wall. The familiar archway immediately appeared, and there was a huge poster in front of him. The Book of Friends, a landmark symbol. You haven't bought a Book of Friends for your child yet. Merlin, what should he do at school? Top quality, excellent but not expensive, irreplaceable enjoyment in the new era. With me by your side, the world is different, communicate anytime, anywhere, the friend book changes your world and mine. Oh my God, Fiona couldn't help but exclaimed. Colorful posters can be seen in almost every corner of the site, and various slogans are rolling and appearing, urging people to buy immediately. Diagon Alley is crowded with people, parents of children everywhere, and even many foreign wizards. They don't need to go to Marchione's shop anymore, because along the streets of Diagon Alley, there is a sales point every 10 meters. The clerk shouted loudly, "Limit 1 book per person. Limit 1 book. Hey, sir, you took too much. Don't worry, we will produce more products soon. Don't worry, if you are willing to wait for 2 days, you can sit in the store and choose slowly." Various styles. But no one listened to him. People kept pushing forward, holding galleons in their hands and shouting loudly. "Give me 3 books. I have 3 children. Don't squeeze in the back. Who stepped on my shoes? I want the red one, give me the red one." A cry suddenly came from the crowd, and the crowded crowd dispersed with a bang. The 2 wizards rolled on the ground and fought. Screams and shouts were mixed together, and soon they were pulled apart by the people next to them. Fiona swallowed her saliva. Why don't we just look here?" A wise choice. Ferdinand bought ice cream, and the 3 of them sat at a small table outside the store, watching the daunting rush to buy over there. The boss Fusco, wearing a vest, brought ice cream to the table and said with a smile, "Are you here to buy the book of friends for your children too?" Yes, Ferdinand said vaguely. "Then you better go buy it early." Fusco adjusted his bow tie and said, "I have inside information. The book of friends made by Aslan Magic Workshop Overtime is only this batch. After the purchase, their staff will have to take a few days off before they can continue to work. So if you miss this one, you will have to wait at least a week to buy it." Wade looked up at him. No wonder the shouting of the clerks to maintain order was useless. With these Diagon Alley bosses promoting inside information to create anxiety, of course everyone will worry that they can't buy it. "What is your inside information?" Ferdinand asked cautiously. "Oh, the daughter of a neighbor of my distant aunt works in Aslan's magic workshop and is responsible for the production of the Book of Friends, so my information is absolutely true and reliable," Fusco said proudly. "Oh," Ferdinand nodded doubtfully. "Wade, could this inside information be released by Marchione's employees?" In order to stimulate consumption, rumors were deliberately spread. On the one hand, the official propaganda was, "We have a lot of inventory," and on the other hand, people revealed the inside information, "Inventory is tight." Of course, people would choose to believe the latter. "Wait a week, it's nothing, right? Wasn't it good to have only owls before?" Fiona asked curiously. "How is this the same?" Boss Fusco looked at Wade and said, "Think about your son, madam. When he gets to school, his classmates are talking about and exchanging friend books, but he has nothing. Won't he be isolated? At least he will feel inferior, right? Think about that scene. As a parent, wouldn't you feel uncomfortable?" Fiona followed his words and imagined it. The students in the school were playing in groups, chatting in the friend book, laughing and joking with each other, and her Wade could only stand alone in the corner, watching pitifully. Fiona's heart suddenly became sad, and she nodded repeatedly and said, "Yes. Of course. It's too pitiful. It can't be like this." "Right, everyone thinks so. At least let the child bring a friend book to school, so that he won't be out of tune with other children. So is there anyone who can resist not buying it?" "Can't resist. Then I will definitely buy it," Fiona said very flatteringly. Fusco sighed and left, still sighing about the love of parents for their children. Fiona was looking at the people rushing to buy things, and suddenly she stood up. Ferdinand grabbed her arm again. Wade looked at her in surprise. "Ferdinand, Wade already has a friend's book, remember?" Ferdinand said helplessly. "He has a lot of friends' books, and he can exchange with everyone he meets. He is not a poor guy. He is even the inventor of the friend's book. What kind of things does he want?" Fiona blinked and suddenly realized. "Oh, yes. Wade. So, you were really encouraged, not secretly promoting for me, right?" The next morning, when Wade was woken up by his father, he found that it was an hour earlier than the alarm clock had been set. "It snowed last night, Wade." Ferdinand was still cold, and he urged, "Get up quickly, we have to leave early today." Wade sat up from the quilt, pulled his messy hair, and opened the curtains. He saw that the snow on the windowsill was about 2 inches thick, and the yard was also white. There was a circle of footprints around the car, which was left by Ferdinand when he was clearing the snow in the morning. Wade dressed quickly and went downstairs for breakfast. He heard his parents arguing in the kitchen. "Listen, dear, it's too cold today. There's no need for all of us to go to the station. It's enough for me to send Wade off alone. But I also want to send Wade off. I won't see him for half a year after he goes back to school." Quote, the two talked for a long time, and finally Ferdinand insisted that Fiona stay at home. He usually obeyed Fiona, but if he made a decision, no one could beat him. After the two came out of the kitchen, Wade pretended not to hear their argument. After breakfast, he asked, "Mom, can you help me take care of Miss Ava first? Let her fly to Hogwarts when the weather is good." "Okay." Fiona agreed happily and immediately made plans. "I can make her owl food myself. General Bard's rations are almost finished. And Milline, I think she may need to lose weight. The running wheel I bought before was also bitten. Milline is Fiona's pet hamster. She is a shy little guy and doesn't need her to worry about it." Seeing that she no longer entangled in the issue of seeing her off and instead focused on a few pets, Ferdinand was relieved. They quickly finished breakfast, and Ferdinand picked up Wade's big suitcase and stuffed it into the trunk. "Goodbye, Mom." Before getting in the car, Wade turned around and said goodbye, and Fiona stood in front of the door and waved vigorously. The car slowly left. As Ferdinand expected, the road was slippery on snowy days, and the car drove very slowly. Even so, someone had a collision. 2 cars stopped on the side of the road, and some broken parts were scattered on the snow. The car was very quiet. Wade looked out the window, and suddenly his eyes blurred. A gray car seemed to appear next to them as if squeezed out of the air. "Ah, what happened?" Ferdinand looked at the rearview mirror and caught his son's surprised look. "Nothing. I seem to see a car rear-end collision." "Well, it happens all the time." Ferdinand didn't get distracted and focused on the front, so as not to encounter an accident and not have time to brake. Wade watched the gray car next to him run parallel to them for a few minutes and then suddenly disappeared from sight. When he found it again, it just chased the car in front and drove through the intersection. The next second, the green light turned red. No one on the street noticed anything, including Ferdinand, who didn't notice the car that seemed to be jumping forward. If an ordinary person could see it, it would probably be regarded as a ghost story, right? Wade couldn't help thinking. The slowly moving car finally arrived at King's Cross Station, and it was still more than 10 minutes before the car started. Ferdinand took the suitcase off the car, put it on the trolley, and pushed it all the way to platform 9 3/4. When he got here, Ferdinand walked slower and slower, and finally had to stop. Vidkin held his hand. "Let's go in together, Dad," he said. Ferdinand smiled bitterly. "No, Vidkin, I'm not a wizard, I can't." "Yes," Vidkin interrupted him and said. "Platform 9 3/4 has no magical restrictions, even muggles can enter. It's just that the Ministry of Magic has cast a spell here, and muggles usually ignore it." "So, Ferdinand took a deep breath, staring at the brick wall in front of him with eyes as if looking at some monster. "I can also enter this platform." "Yes, come with me." Vidkin held his hand and led him forward. Ferdinand looked nervous, and when he was about to hit the brick wall, he couldn't help but close his eyes. Nothing happened. But the ears suddenly became noisy. A crimson train stopped at the platform, all the carriage doors were open, and children in Hogwarts uniforms leaned on the train windows to say goodbye to their parents. The platform was also crowded with people. Some children were running around in a hurry, and some were hugging their parents reluctantly. There were cats walking freely on the ground, and the owls in the cage turned their heads and looked around. The older students gathered together and started discussing their homework for the holidays. Some students struggled to get out of their mother's arms, saying, "Don't kiss me like that, Mom, I'm not a child anymore." "Have you put away all your friend books?" An old woman who looked very stern said to the child next to her, "Don't lose them, remember to contact them every day." The silly-looking child next to her said honestly, "I know, Grandma." "Can I have another friend book, Dad?" A girl begged while clinging to her father's arm. "I have a lot of friends at school. My sister hasn't started school yet, you can buy her one in a few days." "Don't even think about it." A girl who was obviously younger next to her jumped and shouted, "Don't even think about it, that's mine." Looking around, at least 1 out of every 3 passengers was talking about the friend's book, and some couldn't wait to take out paper and start writing, indulging in online chatting. Some took out the friend's book every few minutes to see if there was any new message. In order to reply in time, they even clipped a portable pen in their chest pockets or ears. Ferdinand watched this scene almost obsessively. 9 3/4 station was different from Diagon Alley. It was once the starting point of his dream magic, but it eventually shut him out. When he was a child, he had imagined countless times that he would embark on a journey here, but in the end, he stepped into it for the first time at the age of 32. After a while, Ferdinand retracted his gaze and said in a suppressed, slightly trembling voice, "Let's go, Wade, let's find a carriage for you." They walked along the platform for a while and found an empty carriage. Wade put away his suitcase, got off the train and said goodbye to his father. "Ved." Ferdinand put his hand on Ved's shoulder, wanting to say something, but he couldn't. "Tell him to study hard. Ved has studied harder than anyone else. Tell him to build good relationships with others. Ferdinand has said this many times. Tell him, his parents will always be his backers, and he can ask his family for help no matter what problems he encounters. But Ferdinand knew clearly that he and his wife were completely powerless in the face of wizards. Even if Ved really asked them for help, what could they do for him except empathize with his pain? After a while, Ferdinand tightened his palm slightly. "We are always proud of you, Wade. No matter what challenges you encounter, don't be afraid, don't hesitate, and ask the teacher for help in time when you encounter trouble, understand?" Wade nodded, looked into his father's eyes, and asked softly, "Dad, you didn't want me to go to Hogwarts at the beginning, right? Why didn't you stop it?" "I can't, Wade." Ferdinand smiled bitterly. "I want to, but I can't, because I have heard that if underage wizards cannot learn to control their magic, they will generate a dark force called Obscurus, destroy themselves, destroy everything." So he could only watch his son step into the slaughterhouse that was like a death harvester in his eyes with worry. Can't stop it. Can't stop it. Chapter 51. A sharp whistle sounded and all the train doors were closed. The front of the car sprayed steam and began to move forward with a clang. Wade waved out from the window and watched his father's figure gradually go away. He turned around and sat down, his heart heavy. The Book of Friends felt faintly warm. After opening it, I saw that there were several more sentences on the first page. "Fiona, is the road going smoothly? The train should have already departed, right? Fiona, Miss Ava seems a little unhappy. I think it may be because you didn't bring her with you. Fiona, is it cold on the train?" Wade smiled, took out his pen and replied sentence by sentence. "Vede, we had a smooth trip. The train just left, and Dad should be on his way home already. If Miss Ava is unhappy, maybe you can feed her some dried fish. That was her favorite snack. I remember it was on the second floor of the cabinet. Or some scarabs or dried locusts, and she'll be happy too. Just don't eat too much, or it may cause gastrointestinal problems. Of course, you must know these. In addition, there was probably a warmth charm to maintain the temperature on the train, so it wasn't cold and the scarf was also very warm. I will remember to take more photos. Hi, Vader." When Vader was about to stop writing, Michael poked his head in and said happily, "I knew you should be in this direction, guys, here." He waved in the other direction, then dragged the box into the car and said excitedly, "It's big news, isn't it, Wade?" "What?" Wade was a little confused. "Of course it's the Book of Friends." Michael pulled out his wand, let the box float to the luggage rack and put it away. He sat down and said, "Before school started, my parents were in a hurry to buy a copy. When they knew I had a whole copy in my hand, I was so surprised. But I thought it was a secret among SSC members, but I suddenly heard that it was on sale in Diagon Alley, so the rumor is true, right?" "What rumors?" Wade found that after not seeing each other for 3 weeks, he couldn't keep up with Michael's topics. "Oh, we've all heard about it. Some people came up to me and asked me, because they knew we were in the same grade." Theo also entered the door at this time, and continued, "But I have to say, they all look like I didn't really believe it. I thought someone was lying." "Hi, Vader. Long time no see." Ryan followed in and said, "I guess you rarely look at the SSC chat page." "Well, because I still want to read a book," Wade asked. "I guess that's it, otherwise you wouldn't be able to say nothing." Ryan shrugged, "Let Theo explain, he knows better." Theo Mancini, although his surname is not among the legendary 28 saints, he is actually a pure blood and is relatively well informed. "That's right. There were rumors before the Book of Friends came out." Theo looked at Wade and said, "They said that there will be a new, cheaper, and more convenient communication method that may break the today's loose structure among wizards, makes the relationship between people closer." Michael said, "I guessed at that time, whether they were talking about the Book of Friends." So even though he had a Book of Friends in his hand, he didn't dare to give it to his parents or friends. Instead, he kept it at the bottom of the box. Every day, he took out the Book of Friends and secretly chatted with his friends on the pretext of saying that he needed to study, and told them not to use the Book of Friends as a gift. The account is revealed. But at that time, except for Michael, whose friend list was all in his own hands, everyone else had at least given one page to their parents. So everyone hurriedly patched up the matter and told their parents to keep it a secret. Unexpectedly, after 2 or 3 days, the gossip seemed to spread all over the world, and everyone knew about it. In those days, our flow powder was used up several times faster than usual. Ryan said. Many people wanted to get involved. My father said he knew a pure-blood noble who tried every means to get it. Agency to the Americas. But the owner of Aslan's magic workshop, Marchione, is a cunning and unpredictable character. This is my grandfather's assessment. Theo continued. He said that Marchione is like a hyena. If anyone messes with him, he will take the enemy's intestines out of his. Mancini's grandfather's words were actually more vulgar, and Theo was too embarrassed to repeat them, so he just kept it vague. No one dared to mess with Marchione. No one had ever taken advantage of him. However, some people said that Marchione also obtained the authorization for the Book of Friends patent from others, and the inventor also just a first-year student at Hogwarts. Theo looked at Vader. Someone is trying to find you like crazy. I was really afraid of hearing your name at that time, Vader. Ryan said with a bit of worry. Theo continued. But the great alchemist Terence Murray publicly stated at a banquet that the inventor was his student, and he would never tolerate anyone causing trouble to his students. If it would be considered an insult and a provocation to Terence Murray for anyone to go around him to find his students. Ryan added. It was only after this that I learned that Professor Murray has a very high status in some fields, and there is also Dumbledore in Hogwarts. At this point, a witch who was pushing a cart selling snacks passed by the door. They stopped talking and everyone bought some snacks. Then the interrupted topic continued. Professor Dumbledore also said that he hoped everyone could respect his students, otherwise he would have no choice but to defend the rights of his students. Suddenly everything was calm again. Theo said as he unwrapped the chocolate frog. I heard that those who have ideas are now looking for Marchione again. Maybe they think that the cost of provoking Marchione is lower. Oh, my chocolate frog. The frog jumped out suddenly, and Theo hurried to catch it but failed to catch it. Finally, Wade stopped it before it jumped out of the window. Thank you, Wade. Wade handed over the chocolate frog and asked, so, my name hasn't been spread? Most people don't know. Many of them thought I was a 6th or 7th grade student. Ryan said, but I guess it shouldn't be hidden from those pure-blood nobles, even if Professor Dumbledore and Professor Murray say so. But Wade, you'd better not be alone in school. Michael put his arm around Wade's shoulders and said with a smile, don't worry, we will be inseparable like conjoined twins. By the way, brother, it is rumored that Marchione spent a lot of galleons to buy the usage fee. Some people say that you are rich enough to rival a country. Is that true? When the other two avoided the topic, he asked frankly. Wade tried to speak calmly and not to sound boastful. It's not that exaggerated, only 50,000 galleons. Michael grinned as if he had a toothache. 50,000 galleons. I have never seen so much money in my life. Theo smiled relaxedly. Some people say it's 1,000,000 galleons. What nonsense. Ryan suddenly pressed his shoulder, and Theo stopped talking immediately. There was a knock on the door outside the carriage. Boom, boom, boom. There was a gentle knock on the carriage door. Theo, who was near the door, stood up and opened the door. Hello. Wade and others heard voices coming from outside. Mancini, are you in this compartment? I heard Vader Gray is over here. It seems that I found the wrong one. I should go further ahead. The people outside were minding their own discussions and were going to look for him in other carriages, but an accidental glance allowed him to see Wade sitting inside. The student was startled for a moment, and the carelessness on his face turned into a warm smile in an instant. So you're really here. He squeezed past Theo and walked in with the other two people, as if they were familiar, and said, Hi, Gray, how was your vacation? Theo was squeezed into a corner and watched helplessly as 3 students who were much taller than him walked into the carriage. The space suddenly seemed cramped. Who are you? Wade raised his eyebrows slightly and was about to speak when Michael suddenly stopped him. He stood up and said with a smile, Long time no see, Pruitt. I heard you guys went to Iceland for Christmas. Pruitt then turned to look at him and said with a smile, Yes, I saw the impressive scenery. After I came back, I heard about the Book of Friends. He looked at Wade and said, It's so amazing. I immediately bought the full hardcover version of the Book of Friends. There are 12 books in total, corresponding to the 12 months of the year. Michael praised it cooperatively. As expected of the Pruitt family, even Marchione had to give in. We only got a limited edition copy. If we want to buy the second copy, I will have to wait until 2 weeks later. Don't worry, it won't be that long. As long as there is money to be made, Marchione will be as fast as riding a growling. Of course, only the first batch of December's limited edition will be sold, and only selling to a truly ancient and noble pure blood family is different from some, well, it's different. He said arrogantly, glancing at Theo as if casually. The Mancini family is actually not that bad, at least much richer than the Weasley family. It's just that Theo was sorted into Hufflepuff and seemed to be labeled a fool and fool. He was immediately swept into the lower echelons of the contempt chain by these arrogant purebloods. Ryan's face was cold, and he was about to stand up, but Theo held his shoulders and stopped him from speaking. Michael didn't seem to understand what he meant and said with a smile, "The Pruitt family is indeed very old, these two are." The two people standing behind Pruitt kept looking at Vader with quite interested eyes, and sometimes looked at Michael. The two Hufflepuffs were completely ignored by them. Their scarves had large patches of green with silver stripes, and their expressions were somewhat gloomy. It was obvious that they were all Slytherins. Among several academies, the only one with a good relationship with Snake Academy is Ying Academy, but this is good because when they meet, they greet each other, say a few words, and are polite to each other. Not much. Pruitt was waiting for someone to ask, and immediately introduced, "This is Gaston Yaxley." The boy with blonde hair and thick eyebrows smiled at Wade and nodded. "This is O'Nell Foley." The boy with dark skin and a softer face smiled kindly. "They are all 6th-year Slytherin students. I heard that the inventor of the Book of Friends is in this compartment, so I wanted to come and get to know him," Pruitt said. Although he still had a smile on his face, he looked at Michael forcefully and signaled, "You kid, get out of the way." Michael could no longer block it, so he had to get out of the way. When he turned around, he winked at Vader, conveying the message silently. The boy named Gaston Yaxley stepped forward, stretched out his hand and said politely, "Hello, Mr. Gray." Under Michael's slightly nervous gaze, Wade stood up and shook hands, "Hello." Although the tone is flat, others will naturally be more tolerant of talented people. As long as you don't refuse in person, in Slytherin's eyes, it's a sign of friendship. A faint smile appeared on Yaxley's pale face. "I didn't expect the inventor of the Book of Friends to be so young. Ravenclaw has not had such an outstanding student for many years. Mr. Gray, you are truly capable and capable. Talented people will not be inferior to Terence Murray in the future. I think you need to be on a bigger stage to give full play to your wisdom." He paused and said in a long tone, "The Yaxley family is willing to provide you with some help." Although Pruitt was still smiling, a trace of jealousy could not be suppressed on his face. Michael looked at him, and then glanced at Foley on the other side. The Slytherin had an impeccable smile on his face, and no idea could be seen. "Thank you very much for your kindness. I am deeply honored," Wade said politely, "but I am only an apprentice in alchemy, and I am far from being able to compare with Professor Murray. Of course, there is no doubt about Professor Murray's level, but I admire your future even more." Yaxley's words were unintentionally condescending. Although the alchemy level in the Book of Friends is very basic, many 6th and 7th grade students we are all capable of doing it, but what's more worthy of admiration is this wonderful idea. How did you come up with it? Vader nodded and said, "Speaking of this, I'm not actually the first. Do you know about the Muggle Internet?" Muggle. The faces of the three people changed almost at the same time, as if they had heard some polluting term. "Yes," Wade smiled and said, "the core protocol of Internet communication is TCP/IP protocol. By dividing the data into data packets for transmission, the client sends requests to the server, receives and parses the server's response. The server then returns the processed results to the client. The instruction sequence of the operation and the original data are in the process of input." Wade politely popularized the working principle of the computer, and then talked about the Internet, cloud computing, electronic chips, wide area network, data plane and other messy concepts, and also talked about the future of e-commerce, the deep integration of artificial intelligence and big data, blockchain technology and digital currency. He was the only one who spoke in this carriage, and everyone else opened their eyes blankly, as if they had become ignorant babies. Including some students who came here after hearing the news and wanted to meet Wade Gray. They all stood at the door and dared not come in, as if there was some strange seal here. When Wade stopped for a while, the three people who had resisted interrupting him out of politeness immediately stood up and said goodbye. Their faces were pale as if they had just been washed by a rainstorm. Their backs even looked a bit embarrassed as if they had fled in a panic. Theo walked over to close the door, and saw that the few people in the corridor hurriedly avoided his sight, as if they were afraid that he would pull them in and start to fill their brains with magic sounds. Theo closed the door and locked it with a spell, and the 4 people laughed at the same time. Wonderful, so wonderful. Michael couldn't help giving a thumbs up. I thought you would just push it back. Vader didn't know when he made this Gryffindor impression on him. How much Slytherin holds grudges, just look at Malfoy and Potter. Vader shrugged, used a spell to isolate the sound of the carriage, then poured himself a glass of water, and said, I don't want to be in school. I was harassed by them every day. Theo nodded. You're right, Yaxley is a person who takes revenge, and unlike Malfoy, who likes to use some despicable means, even the professor has never caught him. His handle, Ryan, it's time for you to control your temper. Ryan curled his lips, neither agreeing nor objecting, and then asked, Vade, can that muggle computer really do that? He carefully recalled what Wade said just now, and finally extracted a small part of the content that he could barely understand. They can buy everything from all over the world at home. Wade smiled. Actually, the earliest online shopping started about 10 years ago, and it will definitely develop more conveniently in the future, but I actually don't know much about this aspect. Wade is not an expert in computers. In his previous life, he was only at the level of an ordinary college student. Most of the C language programming he learned was returned to the teacher after the exam. Reborn in this world, because he understood the future development of computers, Wade thought about delving into this technology and making WeChat, Douyin, shopping websites, smartphones, etc. available in advance, so that he might be able to become a world's richest man. But Wade's studies had just begun, and he received the admission notice to Hogwarts. The world's richest man in magic, Vader only hesitated for 0.1 seconds before choosing the latter. Michael said in disbelief, but I just saw that what you said was very reasonable. I just said some things I saw in magazines, it sounds very bluffing, right? Wade leaned on the carriage and said with a smile, you don't understand, and Pruitt and the others must not understand either. I don't understand, but I am very confident, they will think that I know a lot, but they can't communicate with me, so they have to stay away, otherwise they will feel uncomfortable just listening. Merlin, Theo said with emotion, I thought you were a computer expert among muggles. I have watched their TV, and what the experts said on it was not as difficult to understand as you said. Quote. For a moment, Theo wondered if what he heard was English, or if muggles had invented a language specifically for their computers. By the way, Wade seemed to have mentioned this concept just now. What computer language? C, C++, Java, Python. Theo was lost in thought. So muggles really did this. A machine was invented, and many complex languages were invented for this machine. I think you seemed a little nervous just now. Wade asked Michael, what are they all about? They are one of the more troublesome groups of purebloods, the kind of people who might readily defect to the past if you know who were to come back. Michael said, Yom Pruitt, you may not have noticed it before. He is a 6th-year Ravenclaw student. He is keen on holding various large and small parties in the lounge. Even if the defense against the dark arts course is just he also got excellent in the OWL's exam through self-study, but he is better at all kinds of small curses. He is narrow-minded and it is best not to provoke him. Quote. Ryan sighed and said, I used to, before I entered Hogwarts, I thought Ravenclaws were all nerds who study hard. Did you see the look of that Pruitt? He looked like I wish I could serve as a pawn for Yaxley. Because Pruitt is not the real Pruitt. Theo recalled. I seem to have heard someone say that his great-great-grandmother married a mixed-race wizard named Dion or Dick. Later, pure wit, after the publication of the Bloodline List, their family changed their surname to Pruitt, one of the 28 sacred tribes. Then what? Wade asked curiously. Did the Pruitt family recognize this relative? No, they have never been recognized by the Pruitt family. But both Pruitt brothers were killed in the war against you-know-who and the Death Eaters. Pruitt I mean Yom Pruitt's father and uncle are now high-ranking officials in the Ministry of Magic. They claim to be pure-blooded Pruitt, and no one cares about them. Theo looked at the expressions of everyone listening to the gossip and said with a smile, actually, the school. The closest ones to Pruitt are the Gryffindor Weasleys. Weasley. Everyone was surprised. Yes, Ron Weasley's mother's surname was Pruitt, and the 2 brothers who died that year were her brothers. Theo said. Are they all dead? Ryan asked. Yes. It was terrible. I mean the war, thankfully it's over. Ryan silently thanked Harry Potter in his heart. Even though the boy did not show any extraordinary excellence or power, he really saved the world, and this alone was enough. Many people, including Ryan's parents, are grateful and respectful of the boy who survived. What about Yaxley and Foley? Wade asked. Yaxley, Theo's face turned pale. His father used to work for you-know-who, just like Malfoy. After you-know-who disappeared, they all claimed that they were under the influence of the Imperius Curse and escaped punishment with money. Unlike Malfoy, his father is still working in the Ministry of Magic. He is said to be a cruel and cold-blooded person. I have no doubt that Yaxley must be good at using dark magic. Michael was surprised. Even if they are really controlled by the Imperius Curse, they must have done a lot of bad things, right? And they still stay in the Ministry of Magic as officials. Yes, that's right, Theo said with a wry smile. It's incredible, isn't it? Michael was silent. This smart boy suddenly felt that the majestic image of the Ministry of Magic in his heart began to collapse. As for the Fry family, Theo continued, their family was once a follower of Grindelwald. After that man was defeated by Dumbledore, the witch party also disappeared from people's sight, and the Fry family kept a low profile. But no matter what, the witch party was once a more terrifying existence than the Death Eaters, so you must be extra careful of him. The carriage was quiet for a long time. Michael and Ryan, both of them are half-blood wizards, and they don't know much about the families, forces, and wars that have happened in the wizarding world. Some things will not be recorded in the history of magic. Little wizards like them who were born in peacetime mostly think that war is a story in textbooks and a crazy test point in exams, but they don't know that the shadow covered by the wings of war is among their classmates. Thinking of Professor Quirrell who was possessed by Voldemort in the school, and then thinking of those classmates who may yearn to become Death Eaters, the young children couldn't help but sigh deeply, feeling very heavy. The journey was very peaceful afterwards. Occasionally, there were some students who came to watch the inventor of the Book of Friends, but Wade used the internet concept as a weapon to end the topic in a few minutes. When he was about to get off the train, no one came to talk to him about these annoying topics. The train slowly stopped at Hogsmeade Station. The students changed into thick clothes and got off the train. In the distance, the brightly lit Hogwarts was waiting for them. Follow me, students, a loud voice sounded. Hagrid, who looked like a wild man, was waiting for them on the dark platform, wearing a thick fur coat and holding a lantern, like a burly giant. For students who don't understand Hagrid's inner self, his appearance is really intimidating. The originally noisy students immediately fell silent and followed Hagrid as they walked forward along the platform. There were many dark carriages parked in a wide open space, with dim lights hanging on both sides of the carriages, and some carriages would sway slightly. The students boarded the carriage one after another. Wade and others walked forward together, and suddenly heard a voice saying hello. Hey, Wade, guys, this carriage is empty. They looked up and saw Hermione, Padma, Parvati and Neville all sitting in the same carriage. Padma was the one who spoke. She pointed to the side and saw an empty carriage parked next to it. It was covered with straw. Several people climbed onto the carriage one after another, and Michael waved first and said, "Hello, did you have a good holiday?" "Excellent, except that one person has never looked at the Friends account." Hermione said, "I originally thought it would be easier to discuss the problem on the Friends account. Especially when I was studying the disarming spell." "Oh, Hermione, wait a minute, we haven't started school yet." Padma stopped her with a headache. "Let's talk about it tomorrow, okay? Let's talk about studying tomorrow." Even if she was a Ravenclaw, she would still find Hermione's enthusiasm for learning intimidating. "Meet you at the library tomorrow afternoon," Wade suggested. "I just want to borrow some new books." Hermione had no choice but to sit back with regret, while Parvati next to her quietly breathed a sigh of relief. Although no one urged her to study, she felt as if she was trapped in an invisible glass cover and was about to suffocate when she listened to the top students discussing their studies, but she couldn't understand or participate at all. While they were talking, Neville jumped out of the carriage in a panic, clutching his toad leaf tightly, and squeezed into Wade's carriage. "Hey, Neville, we've got enough people here," Michael protested. "Please, let me stay here, there are girls over there." Neville begged in a low voice, looking like he was suffering greatly, but his body pushed Michael into the corner without hesitation, refusing to go down even if he said anything. Michael, who was forced to sit close to the carriage, said angrily, "What's wrong with being with girls? The ones sitting next to you are the most beautiful girls in Hogwarts. They're also twins." There was clear laughter from the girls, not sure if it was because they heard Michael's words. Neville lowered his head helplessly, not daring to see who was laughing, and whispered, "They are always laughing, it's so embarrassing, I can't stay there alone." Michael cursed angrily. "Neville, you are such a hopeless idiot." He jumped out of the carriage without hesitation before it moved, and went straight to the girl's carriage. After a while, I got in the car and started chatting and laughing with Padma. Neville breathed a sigh of relief and looked very impressed. Vader and the three of them couldn't help but burst out laughing, and Neville chuckled and scratched his head in embarrassment. The carriage moved swaying, the road was not very smooth, and the carriage bumped along with it. There was a musty smell in the carriage, and there was a thick layer of straw under the buttocks. Ryan couldn't help but said, "I wanted to ask the last time I took a car, why is there no cushion in this car?" When they went home for Christmas, they also took these carriages to Hogsmeade Station. However, when they left the academy, they were with people from their own academy and had no chance to get together. Theo guessed, "Maybe it's to follow tradition, it's not like there's no funds, right?" Anyone who has seen the scene at Hogwarts during normal meals will not think that the school cannot afford a few soft cushions. A school that provides food and accommodation and does not charge tuition fees, what else can we ask for? Just think of it as a test for us," Wade said, lighting the straw pile on the car with his wand, and the withered yellow straw suddenly turned into a thick cushion. Several people touched the mats and said enviously, "Oh, the transformation technique is so difficult." Under Vader's guidance, their grades in the charms class were all good, but most of the transfiguration classes had to be done on their own, and Vader couldn't put firm beliefs and clear images into their minds. "Do Muggle schools charge fees?" Theo asked curiously. Wade thought about the primary school he went to and said, "Public primary schools are basically free and only charge a small amount of miscellaneous fees. But private schools cost at least £10,000 a year." £10,000. Theo was confused. "How much is this?" "About 2,000 galleons, Vader said. Theo was stunned. "It's so expensive, Muggles are really rich." Even if he was a pureblood, it would be impossible for his family to spend 2,000 galleons a year to send him to school. Maybe he would have to be as rich as the Malfoy family to afford school, right? "Most Muggle students also go to public primary schools," Wade said. "Speaking of which, these carriages in the school are really good and can drive automatically. Are they also alchemy items?" Ryan asked curiously. Neville suddenly raised his head, pursed his lips, and wanted to say something, but held back. "No, it seems like there is an invisible horse pulling." Michael probed his head. "Listen carefully." Several people held their breath and listened carefully. The invisible creatures in the air heard the sound of hissing, breathing, snoring, and the sound of wings flapping the air. "A horse that can be invisible," Ryan frowned and thought, "I seem to have seen this kind of creature in some book." "It's Thestrals," Vader revealed the answer. "Yes," Ryan clapped his hands excitedly, "it's the Thestrals. Legend has it that only people who have witnessed death with their own eyes can see them, that's why we can't see them. So, they are not invisible, but people can't see them." Theo frowned and sorted out the logical relationship. "Yep," Wade responded casually, nodded, and looked towards the front of the carriage. "The skinny black horse has a pair of white, pupilless eyes, and a face as ferocious as a dragon." It meekly pulled the carriage forward, its huge bat wings folded gently at its sides. Maybe it was because Ryan's voice was a little loud, so it raised its head uneasily and sped up its pace slightly. The wheel turned creakingly and finally stopped in front of the stone steps of the castle. Vader jumped out of the carriage. "The night air is very cold, and the breath you exhale turns into white mist." He turned around and met Yeki's pale, empty eyes. "This feeling is very strange." No wonder that in ancient times, people equated seeing the Thestrals with seeing death, and believed that the Thestrals would bring disaster to those who saw them. What are you waiting for? Wait. Ryan patted his back, stamped his feet and said, "It's really cold today." The students stepped on the snow and stone steps and couldn't wait to enter the castle. At the corner of the foyer, Filch glared angrily at the children who had brought muddy water into the castle. The lights in the auditorium were brightly lit, and the house elves still prepared a sumptuous dinner. Dumbledore sat on the teacher's bench and looked at the new students with a smile. In the early morning, the bedroom was still dark. While Wade was sleepy, he suddenly felt someone looking at him. In the dormitory where he was alone, the sight that did not belong to him was particularly obvious. Wade opened his eyes drowsily, and suddenly saw a row of huge, shining eyes in the darkness, like small lanterns floating in the air. Boom! His heart twitched violently. Vader sat up suddenly, subconsciously grabbed the wand and pointed it at him. "Who is it?" "Mr. Gray is awake." The house elf's shrill voice sounded. "Zoe knows that Mr. Gray will return to the castle today, and Zoe has been waiting." His slender fingers snapped in the air, and the oil lamp in the dormitory immediately lit up. The three house elves stood side by side on the floor in the center of the dormitory, not realizing how scary it was for them to appear like this in the middle of the night. They looked at Vader with a warm smile on their faces. Wade felt that his rapidly beating heart almost hurt his ribs. He took a deep breath, his cold fingers gradually became warmer, and his scalp still had a tremor like an electric shock. "Zoe, Happy, Phil," Wade said as calmly as possible. "Long time no see. Why did you suddenly show up in the middle of the night?" The elves bowed deeply, swayed their big ears, and said happily, "It's like this. For Christmas, Phil received another gift from Vader Gray." But Vader Gray must have noticed, he didn't get a gift from Happy. "It's not that there are no gifts, but because Zoe has prepared a better one." Phil wanted to give Wade Gray the gift he really wanted. But what did Wade Gray want? Phil thought and thought. While cleaning in Ravenclaw Tower, Hubby heard the words of the first years, and then Hubby finally knew. The three house elves smiled happily and said in unison, "Wade Gray will definitely want a broom." "I do want it." Wade sat on the bed and looked at them and said, "But the school regulations prohibit freshmen from bringing brooms into the school. Otherwise, he could actually buy a new one himself during the Christmas holidays. There are indeed rules, but Vader Gray will not break the rules." Zoe opened her arms and said, "Because the broom is already in the school, Vader Gray just uses it. As long as the first-year students perform well in the flying class, it is of course possible for them to borrow the upperclassman's broomstick to fly for a while after class. When the Quidditch teams of various colleges are training, there are often some little wizards waiting around the field, just to wait for them to finish training and borrow brooms to have fun. But it is impossible for a house elf to steal a student's broom, nor to give him a school broom as a gift." "Did you find a lost broom?" Wade looked at the elves and asked in surprise. More than one." Happy waggled his ears. "There are several. A broom without an owner. Come with Zoe, Vader Gray." The elf pulled his finger and said, "Zoe wants to take Vader Gray to get his gift." "Oh, okay, wait, let me put on some clothes." Wade lifted the quilt and sat up, looking at the elves again. Can you guys step away for a while?" On a January morning, the sky was very dark, the cold wind blew against the windows, and there was even a layer of frost condensing on the windowsill. Vader followed the three house elves and walked in the empty corridors of the castle, and could clearly hear the echo of his own footsteps. It was almost early in the morning, and even Filch was not patrolling around, waiting to catch students who violated the curfew. It seemed that Vader was the only one left in the entire castle, as if he was walking in an ancient oil painting. Vader, who was wearing thick clothes, looked at the house elf who was still wearing only a thin tea towel, and couldn't help but ask, "You guys are wearing so little, don't you feel cold?" Phil shook his head and said, "It's not cold. Phil can adapt to different environments, summer, winter, very cold, very hot, whatever." "What a strange creature." Vader looked at them deeply. "What a strange and powerful creature this is. It does not rely on a wand like a wizard. It is born with the ability to cast spells without a wand. It also possesses outstanding and unique magic. It has powerful magic power and can also operate without limit. If wizards hadn't planted thoughts of absolute obedience, and house elves must be enslaved by wizards, in their genes or souls, they might be more dangerous to wizards than fire dragons. In history, Goblins have had many rebellions, always fighting for the rights of the race. But even if house elves are abused and killed by wizards, they will not resist, or even disobey their master's orders. Therefore, ordinary wizards almost always look forward to having their own house elves, but wizards who have house elves rarely treat them well. These house elves who belong to Hogwarts are treated well among their kind, at least the students do not take pleasure in abusing them. Vader lowered his eyes and followed the elves along the corridor for a long distance, sometimes going down 2 flights of stairs, sometimes going up several floors, and then arrived near Gryffindor Tower. The empty corridor had a white wall with nothing on one side, and on the opposite side was a tapestry of a giant wizard in a hat teaching the trolls how to dance ballet. The trolls all turned their heads to look at them. Wade suddenly thought of a place, and he suddenly felt a great expectation in his heart. He asked softly, "What is this place?" "The Come and Go Room, Mr. Gray," Zoe said. "We also call it the Room of Requirement. It will only appear when others really need it. You need to walk through this wall 3 times and concentrate on what you need." Habby said, and walked to the front of the wall, muttering to himself, "Habby needs a place to hide things, a place to hide things, a place to hide things." He walked back and forth, and when he passed by for the 3rd time, a smooth door suddenly appeared on the wall, with a shiny and warm copper handle on the door. Phil stood on tiptoe, pulled the copper handle hard, and the door was slowly opened. Wade couldn't help holding his breath. It seemed as if there was a city with high walls in front of him, with countless abandoned debris piled up inside, forming a hill of streets, broken furniture, rusty weapons, statues cut off by black magic, muggle cannons, thousands of books, various banned dangerous toys, and glass bottles containing unknown potions. His heart was beating fast. The 3 house elves showed him a broom that was wiped and tidied and tied with an old red ribbon with proud and joyful smiles on their faces. "This is a Christmas gift for Mr. Gray," they said loudly. "It's the best one here. It's a little old, but it can still fly well," Phil added softly. No, Wade thought. This Room of Requirement that he had been looking for a long time is the real gift. He grabbed the broom and a surprised smile appeared on his face, as if the whole room became brighter because of it. His smile was very contagious, making the 3 elves also show silly and satisfied smiles. Although Vader had enough galleons in the Gringotts vault to buy 10 more of the latest broomsticks, he still showed great joy at the elves' gifts and shared with them the ones he had brought from home. Candy. When he was changing clothes and going out, he grabbed a pack and stuffed it into his pocket. "This is made by Muggles. It has no magic, but it has a rich flavor and is very delicious." Vader introduced them to them. The elves looked flattered and hesitated for a while. But because this was not the first time that they and Vader exchanged gifts, several house elves quickly calmed down and accepted the candies, thanking them with great gratitude. "Would Wade Gray want breakfast?" Phil asked respectfully. "At this time, most of the breakfast in the kitchen has been prepared." "Okay," Wade said decisively. Phil found a clean old mat from the junk pile, and Zoe and Habby left the Room of Requirement. Soon after, at the same time, one person came back with a large dinner plate filled with food. The other one was holding a large can of drink, which was Wade's favorite orange water. Hubby and the others knelt on the ground, laid out the tablecloth, and put food and drinks on them. Wade also sat down, and then he saw the elves getting up and standing next to them, but they still held candies in their hands and looked at them with smiles. With Vader. Some thoughts suddenly flashed through Wade's mind. He raised his head and said in surprise, "What are you standing for? Everyone, sit down, this is our breakfast meeting." Sit down," Zoe stammered. We. Of course." Wade imitated her words, and then smiled. "Is there anyone else here?" The 3 house elves looked at each other, their expressions even more excited than when they received Vader's gift for the first time, as if sitting down was an unimaginable honor. But they seemed to have their hands and feet tied up. They didn't move for a long time, and their big eyes were a little frightened. Wade emphasized his tone slightly and invited again, "Please sit down, aren't you willing to have breakfast with me?" "Of course, willing." Zoe struggled to breathe as if out of breath, and then carefully sat down next to Wade. Then came Happy, who acted a little braver and sat down opposite Vader, hand and foot. Then there was Phil, who swayed, and with the encouragement of his 2 companions, he sat down in the corner, his slender fingers unconsciously clasping the tablecloth. Then, Vader looked at the 3 house elves and announced, "Let the breakfast party begin." He took the lead in picking up the meat pie, and then gave one to each of the elves, and ate them casually. After a while, there was a faint sound of sobbing in the air. Big tears fell from the house elf's tennis ball-sized eyes. "Weird, so weird," hubby choked while wiping his tears. "Habby is very happy, why are he crying?" Vader said nothing and touched its ugly little head with pity. Phil and Zoe swallowed the pie in big mouthfuls with bitter tears mixed in their stomachs. In the shadows of old furniture, a wizard and 3 house elves sat together for the first time and finished their breakfast in a place where light and dark alternated. Monday in Ravenclaw still starts with the less popular potions class. The room of requirement is on the 8th floor of the castle, and the potions classroom is in the basement. Wade was too lazy to climb the stairs, so he simply flew down on his broom and circled around the castle twice before landing in the central courtyard. When he landed on the ground, Wade's fingers were almost frozen, and his ears and nose were also red from the cold. Facts have proved that winter is not a suitable season for flying. Even if there is a warming spell, it will still be cold under the strong wind. Snapped. Hubby suddenly appeared. He handed Wade's school bag to him, then took the broom diligently, stared at Wade with eyes full of admiration, and said excitedly, "Habby will help Wade Gray put the broom in dormitory." "Thanks for your help, Happy," Vader said with a smile. The harpy bowed deeply, his long nose almost touching the ground, and then he disappeared with his broom. Wade had already had breakfast and originally planned to go directly to the potions classroom. But when the whole body was shivering with cold, the damp and cold underground suddenly became disgusting, and the auditorium with the roaring fire was full of attraction. Wade walked up the steps, crossed the foyer, and sat for a moment in the auditorium. At this time, there were already some struggling 5th grade students sitting at the long table. Most of them had messy hair and looked troubled and helpless. They were eating breakfast and reading, or reading breakfast and eating books. It looked almost broken. Wade did not dare to disturb these stupid high school students. He sat quietly for a while, read a chapter of the potions lesson, and quietly left the auditorium after his body recovered. "Hey, Wade, long time no see." As he walked through the foyer, a familiar voice spoke. "Griffiths." Wade looked over in surprise. "Yes, it's me." The red-haired wizard was lying on a tall picture frame. The original owner of the picture was squeezed into a corner by him. He looked like he was too angry to speak, and stared angrily from behind. "Griffiths. I haven't seen you for a holiday. Did you miss me?" Griffiths said cheerfully, It seems that you had a very pleasant holiday. Your face seems to be a little rounder. I am different." He rolled up his sleeves and pointed to a bruise on his arm and said to Wade, "Did you see it? Someone beat me up. We haven't seen each other for a few years, but I feel that everyone has become unfamiliar, and my temper has become so irritable." "Are you sure it's not because of you that you became irritable?" Wade secretly complained, looked at the poor wizard whose territory was occupied by the bully, and asked Griffiths, "Aren't you in the corridor? Why are you in the hallway again?" "No, my painting is still in the corridor." Griffiths shook his finger and smiled. "They only said that there is no room in the hallway, but they didn't say that I can't visit. Dumbledore won't have any objections to me visiting old friends who have been reunited after a long time." "Hey, little guy." In a painting next to him, an old man wearing a top hat suddenly shouted at Wade, "You brought this guy out of the astronomy tower, right? Please, send him back quickly." Yes. The surroundings seemed to be sleeping. The old men and women who were asleep all shouted, "Send him back, send him back. We finally got him to the astronomy tower, why did you get him out again? Do you know how annoying he is? My hair is falling out in clumps. You are a portrait, your hair won't fall out. I am describing it. Do you understand? Don't find fault with my words. I am just telling the truth. Why are you so angry? Can't we just communicate properly? Who will drag this guy down?" The portraits, which were usually quiet, suddenly quarreled among themselves. The students who got up early for lunch were very surprised and watched with great interest nearby. Wade quietly left the hallway. Griffiths didn't care about the noise caused by him. He walked through the portraits without hesitation, and even woke up some of the guys who were really asleep, and followed Wade out of the hallway. "Noisy guys, right," Griffiths said with a smile, House elves are much quieter than them. Wade stopped and looked at Griffiths. Their eyes met. After a moment, Wade walked forward again, asking, "Did you see it just now?" "Yeah." Griffiths nodded and said, "When I was visiting, I happened to see you in the house elf." The sign of a good house elf is that it does not let wizards discover its existence, and the house elves at Hogwarts have always been the best. Many students have never seen an elf until they graduate. Griffiths commented with a smile. Naive little fools, they thought the castle had some magical housework magic that made their dirty clothes and shoes clean. Whether it will be seen by others is not the criterion for judging good or bad. Wade defended his little friend. The harpy is also very good. You were right. Griffiths nodded and said in agreement, and the fact that he did not refute a word made people feel a little weird. There were no portraits in the corridor ahead, and Griffiths had to stop and watch the little wizard of Ravenclaw go away. A Ravenclaw who made friends with the house elves, he said to himself, and suddenly laughed. Really just friends? Wade suddenly found that the professor's attitude towards him became more gentle, and even Professor Snape gave him 2 extra points for the first time. You know, in the previous potion class, even if Wade's potions were almost perfect every time, Professor Snape would give him 1 point at most 3 times out of 10. Wade really wanted to take a picture of the astonished expressions of the Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs in the classroom. Professor McGonagall, who was always strict, also let Wade stay alone after class and gave him a list of books. Transfiguration is the most magical magic, Professor McGonagall said with a smile. If you can read these books carefully and understand them deeply, you will definitely go further on the road of transfiguration. Thank you, Professor. Wade looked at the list of books. He had not read most of them, but the last few books seemed to be in the forbidden area of the library. That's right. When you finish reading the previous books, you can come to me. Professor McGonagall looked at him expectantly and said, I will sign your approval slip. Professor Flitwick naturally needs no mention. He promised that Wade could borrow any book from his private library at any time, and every time Wade went to ask questions, the candies and desserts on Professor Flitwick's table would be more abundant than usual. Professor Sprout's smile became more friendly, and she also lent Wade a few books on herbology after class. So Wade's time began to become more and more tight. In the morning, he would fly directly from the tower to the 8th floor of the main tower on his broomstick, and one of Zoe and the other 2 would rush to help him return the broom to the dormitory. He would transform the room of requirement into a fitness equipment or a swimming pool to exercise, and then transform it into a study to read books, prepare for his homework, and then have breakfast. During this time, there was always a house elf guarding nearby. If someone passed by nearby, they would remind him in the friend book to prevent him from bumping into anyone when entering and leaving the room of requirement. After that, if he had classes, he would naturally go to the classroom first. When he had no classes, Wade basically spent all his time in the room of requirement. If he wanted to practice magic, the room of requirement could provide relevant books and targets for spells. If he wanted to practice potions, there would be various types of crucibles, scales, fuels, measuring cups, etc., but he still needed to prepare the materials in advance. If he wanted to study alchemy and the gifts and tests given to him by Professor Murray, the various alchemy equipment was even more complete than that of Professor Murray. After dinner and before curfew, this is almost the fixed activity time of SSC. They gather in the Umbrella House to practice spells, complete the homework that has not been completed during the day, discuss and solve problems with each other, or just sit together and chat. In fact, with Wade's advanced learning progress, none of the SSC people can provide any valuable help to his study. This can be regarded as Wade's personal after-school tutoring class, and it doesn't charge money. But not everything needs to be thought from the perspective of mutual use and utilitarianism. The time spent with these partners is also very precious to Wade. Here, his brain and spirit can be fully relaxed, and he can also put down some thoughts that have been weighing on his mind. He can talk and laugh casually, which relieves the fatigue of a whole day of high-intensity study. Moreover, seeing that the originally clumsy Neville and others have made significant progress under his guidance, this joy and satisfaction even exceeds the joy of learning a new magic himself. After all, Wade is accustomed to the latter, and the former is always a surprise every time it appears. Positive emotions are always contagious. Every time the Umbrella House activity ends, everyone has a smile on their face. It would be great if we could suggest to the principal to postpone the school curfew for another hour. Padma packed up her books and said happily, I have never felt so happy studying before. Even Neville nodded. As long as he was in the umbrella house, he didn't even feel that studying potions was painful anymore. He still made mistakes frequently, but his friends around him would correct his mistakes in time, and no one scolded him. Next week is the Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Hufflepuff, right? Michael looked at the people from the two colleges with a searching look in his eyes. Yes, Hermione sighed worriedly. I heard that Professor Snape will be the referee. Then you are miserable, Padma said sympathetically. Professor Snape will definitely not judge impartially. Everyone knows how much he hates Gryffindor, especially when there is Harry in the team of your college. Potter. Almost no one in the entire school knew about Snape's targeting of Harry Potter. But several people who had been to the principal's office last time looked at each other with similar understanding in their eyes. At noon the next day, Hermione gave a signal in the auditorium, and several people gathered in the umbrella house with tacit understanding to talk about this matter. Professor Snape should be sent by the principal to protect Harry Potter on the playing field, right? Ryan said, although Professor Snape has a bad temper, Professor Dumbledore must trust him so much. Because he is trustworthy. Michael played with his Quidditch star model, watching the little puppet being poked down and getting up again and again. He added with a smile, of course, point deductions and protection, these two things can be done at the same time without conflict. Ryan sighed. There are so many professors in the school, why does the principal send the one who hates Harry Potter the most? Wouldn't this be more beneficial to you? Michael asked nonchalantly. That's right, but I think Cedric and the others would also prefer a fair game. Ryan said seriously. Well, it's indeed Hufflepuff. Michael sighed. Ryan said angrily. Don't think I don't know that you actually mean to say I'm stupid. Ha ha ha, how could that happen? Michael said with a dry smile. Anyway, if it was Ravenclaw, he knew that his college would not miss such a great opportunity. Actually, Vader, I want to ask, Hermione was a little embarrassed and said with some pleading, can Harry also join the SSC? The air suddenly became quiet. Ryan was a little uneasy. He saw the smile on Michael's face suddenly disappear, and he just looked at the brown-haired girl and then at Wade. Vader's expression didn't change at all, and he even agreed simply, of course, Harry Potter is not a difficult person to get along with. The problem is you, Hermione. Me. Hermione looked over anxiously. Have you forgotten that you were made angry by Ron Weasley? Potter and Weasley are inseparable. If he joins, he won't hide it from Weasley. Are you ready to forgive him? Vader asked gently. It seemed that he didn't have any objections, and all his considerations were based on concern for Hermione's mood. Oh, this. Hermione breathed a sigh of relief and smiled relievedly. That incident has long since passed, and he also wanted to remind his friends later, didn't he? Although it didn't help, this after getting along for a while, I think Weasley is not that annoying anymore. It's impossible to hold a grudge for a lifetime just because of a quarrel, right? I think it's good to turn enemies into friends. Ryan took the initiative to speak to ease the tense atmosphere, and Ron Weasley's brothers are all excellent, so he must have a very outstanding side, right? This. Hermione probably doesn't agree very much. After she felt relaxed, she couldn't help but want to explain a few more words. Actually, I didn't intend to bring them in. Ron noticed that Neville had made great progress and asked him several times, but Neville didn't say anything. But you all know that Harry, if the Death Eaters and the you-know-who come back, Harry will be the first to be found, but he is not very outstanding in studies, his grades are so-so, and he has no spells taught in class. If you are familiar with it, you have to go to Quidditch training regularly. In Hermione's eyes, Harry Potter turned out to be a scumbag who had an empty reputation but didn't study hard at all. Later it was a good scumbag who has a decent personality but still doesn't work hard enough. When he truly realized that Harry Potter lost his parents because of the war, and that his life is still being threatened by Voldemort and his remnants. Harry Potter had an aura of little pitiful in Hermione's eyes. What's the difference between having poor grades and being a little playful? How gratified his parents must be to see him growing up so happily and healthily. But then, Hermione felt even greater anxiety. She was a person who was prone to anxiety. Thinking that Voldemort was close at hand, Quirrell was watching with eager eyes, and Dumbledore had mysterious and unknown plans, but Harry was just fooling around all day long, either piecing together his homework or borrowing other people's to copy. Hermione almost wanted to pry his head open and tuck her own anxiety into a ball. There is no doubt that Harry Potter will face huge challenges and dangers in the future, and those are definitely not something that he can cope with just by copying his homework. Hermione tried to teach them all the spells she learned in the Umbrella House, but the problem was, when Vader taught them, she felt it was very clear and easy to understand, and she taught Harry and Ron the same way. It was as if his brain had been hit by a giant monster, and he didn't understand it for a long time. Hermione didn't know why, she just felt very grumpy. Sometimes she doubted the IQ of those two people, but looking at Neville's progress, she had to admit that maybe there was something wrong with her own teaching methods. If Harry wants to improve his abilities as soon as possible, joining SSC seems to be the only option. The only thing better than this is that Dumbledore himself is willing to tutor Harry, but how is this possible? So, despite knowing that it was extremely presumptuous and might even make others unhappy with her, Hermione made the request. Fortunately, Wade agreed. After joining the SSC for so long, Hermione naturally understood that as long as Vader agreed, no one else would be a problem. Why did you agree? Michael couldn't help but ask when there were only two people left. What about Harry Potter? Wade asked knowingly. Of course, Michael said seriously. Vade, I don't think you don't know how much trouble Harry Potter means. I thought you wouldn't like this kind of trouble. Well, I really don't like it. Vader leaned back in his chair and said, but if it's Harry Potter, then of course we can make an exception. But, Michael frowned, puzzled. After such a long time, even Neville should have understood. He is just an ordinary boy, who escaped from the death curse for some unknown reason, and for some reason. The reason is that the mysterious man disappeared that night, and the whole world put the title of Savior on his head, as if the mysterious man was defeated by a baby. I originally thought he was born with powerful magic power. But Michael hesitated to speak. But after he went to school, he discovered that his intelligence and ability were not worthy of his reputation as the Savior Star. Wade looked out the window and said what Michael wanted to say but didn't. Michael breathed a sigh of relief. Yes, that's what I meant. He paused and then said, you should have seen it clearly, so you don't have any special expectations for Potter. But why? But Michael, Vader withdrew his gaze from the window, looked at his friend, and said, you shouldn't have forgotten that both Potter's parents died fighting the mysterious man, and they fought heroically to the end. On that night, Harry Potter not only became a savior, he also lost his closest family members. Yes, that's right. Michael's face turned red with shame and he stammered. So no matter what he did, or didn't do, it has nothing to do with any of this. Vader sighed. Harry Potter is the orphan of a martyr. The orphan of a martyr. Michael chewed the word, and suddenly understood why when he gossiped about Harry Potter with his parents did not allow him to say bad things about Harry Potter. Yes, Vader finally said. Everyone who has escaped from the shadow of war and enjoys the peaceful life now has the obligation to take care of him, and children like him, right? Michael has left. Wade turned his head and looked at the window glass. The figure in the glass has a pair of gray eyes. They are neither as deep as black eyes nor as bright as blue eyes. They are more like a quiet lake in autumn and winter, without any strong emotions. Sometimes, people who look at him will have a particularly cold feeling, and people can't help but guess whether he is equally cold in his heart. Through the reflection on the glass, you can see on the grounds outside the castle, a group of students carrying brooms, braving the rainy weather, walking across the lawn back to the castle. Their faces and bodies were covered in mud, as if they had rolled in the quagmire. They couldn't even see their faces clearly, but the thinnest figure among them was still particularly conspicuous. Then, a man in a turban shrank from the cold and trotted across the field of vision. After a while, another black bat-like figure strode into the castle. The sides of his robe were blown high by the wind, and the rain seemed to avoid him in fear. His face was gloomier than the cloudy sky, and all the students he met on the road ran away in panic. Wade couldn't help but smile slightly. Harry Potter, Voldemort, Severus Snape, Savior, Dark Lord, and former Death Eater. Several people with contradictory identities and even murderous intentions are in the same castle, living in peace as teachers and students, just waiting for the moment when they finally meet. Thinking of Michael's expression as if his soul had been baptized when he left, the corners of Wade's mouth raised slightly. He cleared away the clutter on the table, organized his recent homework and notes, put on his school bag and headed to the astronomy tower. Of course, let Harry Potter join, and even try to help him improve his strength. Otherwise, if Voldemort is resurrected, or gains greater strength due to some butterfly effect or the like, who will resist it? Is it Vader, who is still very weak at the moment? Is it Michael, who hangs out with girls all day? Or is it Dumbledore, who was cursed and fell from the tower in the plot? Harry Potter, despite all his shortcomings, such as recklessness, impulsiveness, lack of self-discipline, etc., even though he is good at only a few spells, and has not achieved excellence in other courses except defense against the dark arts, but it is undoubtedly a special killing weapon for ambush. Not to mention when he was a baby, starting from school, Voldemort basically lost every year against Harry Potter. In the last year, Harry Potter had the help of God to find out Voldemort's hidden secrets in a very short time. All the Horcruxes that rose up finally completely buried the Dark Lord, but he himself was almost unharmed. Be it the halo of the protagonist, or the Son of Luck. Vader currently does not have the strength to defeat Voldemort, so he will never refuse such a friend. Even if one day he is more powerful than Voldemort, he will not turn away Harry Potter. Things are unpredictable, and Harry Potter is always a powerful trump card. It was raining outside the castle, and streaks of lightning flashed across the sky. The bright light illuminated mottled shadows through the windows, flashing and disappearing suddenly. Bad weather, isn't it? Professor Murray poured a cup of hot tea, thought for a moment, added some milk and sugar, then sat on the chair and said comfortably. Yes. Vader was also holding hot tea and said with a smile, but I also feel that this kind of weather is particularly suitable for sleeping in. Muggles call this uniform and continuous sound white noise, and think it can shield sound at other frequencies, thereby improving sleep quality. As he became more and more familiar with Professor Murray, Vader learned about the professor's attitude towards Muggles and no longer tabooed talking to him about Muggle theories and technologies. White noise. Professor Murray thought for a moment and smiled. They always have some wonderful and weird research, don't they? I also saw a, research report. It seems to be a study of the human ring finger, the relationship between length and wisdom. But there are also some very interesting studies, such as the interaction between dreams and reality, time travel, forms of alien life, etc. Vader thought for a while and said with some yearning, they are still heading beyond the Earth. Exploration. If interstellar travel can really be realized, I would really like to be a passenger. I'm looking forward to it too, but at my age, I'm afraid I won't see that day. If you live well, it's still possible, or you can refine the philosopher's stone like Mr. Nick Flamel. Murray the professor chuckled and said. Wade also smiled. I have read in books that the magic stone can create the elixir of life. Is Mr. Nick Flame still the same as he was when he was young? He still remembered that Nick Flamel in the movie was like a walking pale ghost, with bones so crisp that they could break at the touch of a touch. He wondered if it would be different in this world. Well, Professor Murray pondered for a moment, then said, I can only say, the elixir of life can indeed allow the owner to escape death, but the cumulative effect of 6 centuries is terrible, and the potion cannot completely offset it. This kind of effect. Then such immortality seems to be meaningless. Wade tilted his head and thought for a moment before saying. Professor Murray couldn't help but smile. Only a child in your prime would say this without hesitation. When you are as old as me, you will understand that when people are approaching the end of their lives, they have to pay attention to death. Fear and attachment to life will make us fear death and long for a longer existence. Would Professor Murray think so? Wade couldn't help asking. I'm just a mortal, of course I would. Professor Murray stroked the teacup and said, but Albus said something, death is a great adventure. No one knows what the world after death is like. It may be as terrible as the legend, or as beautiful as the legend, or just nothingness. Professor Murray seemed to recall something, paused for a moment, and suddenly murmured, so I am afraid of death, but I also look forward to the arrival of that day. I will continue to go on and see what the scenery ahead is. Wade looked at him quietly. Professor Murray suddenly came back from his contemplation and smiled. It's too early for you to say this. By the way, do you have the answer to the question I left for you before? Yes. Wade took the small box out of his pocket and put it on the table, saying in a disapproving tone, "But Professor, this is too expensive. The value of a gift does not lie in how much it costs, but in how you will use it." Professor Murray said in a kind and encouraging tone, "Tell me what you think." Wade opened the box. "This is a piece of bird snake skin. Stephen introduced this creature to me. Its body can stretch at will. It can become as big as a dragon, or it can get into a small teapot. It usually feeds on insects and mice." Professor Murray nodded and asked, "Well, what else?" Wade took a deep breath. "Is the best material for the traceless extension spell." "Tell me about your understanding of the traceless extension spell," Professor Murray continued to say with a smile. "Yes," Wade said seriously, "the traceless extension spell is a space-based spell. I guess it should be able to achieve space extension and space folding at the same time. This spell can be applied to any material, metal, soil, cloth, wood, and the premise of use is a closed, limited space. In theory, the traceless extension spell can expand space from finite to infinite, but in actual application it will be affected by various factors, the most direct of which is the material and the wizard's magic power, and the understanding of the spell." Professor Murray nodded slightly. Most of what Wade said can be found in the book, but it is not an easy task to integrate it. What's more, there are also Muggle theories and his own thoughts in it, which can be regarded as an excellent paper if written down. It can be seen that he did a lot of homework in advance, and this serious and rigorous attitude is what Professor Murray appreciates most. In summary, the traceless extension charm is extremely difficult to use and can be easily abused. Therefore, it is strictly controlled by the Ministry of Magic. Wade paused here, glanced at Professor Murray, and then continued with his smiling eyes. Ministries of magic in various countries have regulations that the traceless extension charm cannot be used for private purposes, and can only be used for the production of individual items approved by the relevant Ministry of Magic. At the same time, wizards are not allowed to possess items for the traceless extension charm without the approval of the Ministry of Magic. Professor Murray couldn't help laughing. "Yes, we are now discussing how to violate the laws of the Ministry of Magic. But Wade, if you are an alchemist but don't have a suitcase with the traceless extension charm, you can't be considered a real alchemist. Of course, in order to avoid trouble from the Ministry of Magic, we also need to learn some hidden means." He raised his hand and summoned a book from the shelf and handed it to Wade. "This book contains a clever trick that can teach you how to make your box appear ordinary at ordinary times, and change into another appearance when you need it. It's very difficult, child, whether it's the box of the traceless stretching spell or this hiding spell, it's very difficult. I look forward to your performance, and, yes, you can ask me any questions." Weeder flipped through the book, put it away carefully, and then took out a piece of parchment. "In fact, I do have a lot of questions to ask you." On the parchment, there were a full list of 20 or 30 questions, none of which could be explained in 2 or 3 sentences. "Oh, very studious, isn't it?" Professor Murray muttered, then put on his glasses and began to answer them one by one. Wade immediately took out a pen and paper and began to take notes. When the Q&A session ended, it was actually far beyond the scheduled tutoring time. "Professor," before leaving, Wade said again, "I actually have one more thing." "Well, what?" Professor Murray was already a little tired, but still said patiently. "It's like this. I took some time to make a box these days. I would like you to help me see if there are any flaws." Wade pulled out a long oak box from the bottom of his school bag. It looked ordinary, and there was not even any obvious trace of magic. Professor Murray chanted a spell and checked it carefully. Can it block the smell of magic items? No, it should be said to be isolated. There are also anti-theft spells, anti-Alaho opening, curse-breaking spells, anti-evil spells. He looked at Wade in surprise. "Are you going to collect some powerful black magic items?" Wade smiled a little embarrassedly. "Actually, I want to borrow some books from the restricted area, but I heard that some books themselves come with powerful black magic, and they will be affected as long as they are close to them." Professor Murray laughed out loud. "Oh, Wade, my child, you are a little too cautious." He laughed for a while, and seeing Wade getting more and more embarrassed, he wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes and said, "Don't worry, when the books in the restricted area are borrowed by students, Madam Pants will do some processing to avoid any bad influence on the students. Wade blushed slightly, and said a little frustrated, "So, did I prepare this box in vain?" "Oh, it's not that bad. It is always better to be cautious." Professor Murray comforted him. "Your box is made perfectly. Most of the black magic items can be completely isolated and will not have any adverse effects on the outside world. At least when you go to bed at night, you can use it to pack dangerous books." Ved didn't seem to be completely relieved yet, and asked, "What are the small part of black magic items that cannot be completely isolated?" "It depends on the size, kid." Professor Murray still had a smile in his words. "If it can't be completely packed, the magic power will naturally leak out. But if it can be completely sealed from beginning to end by your box, you don't have to worry about any black magic power." In the dead of night, a figure wandered back and forth on the 8th floor of the castle. "I need a place to hide things, a place to hide things, a place to hide things." The familiar door appeared again, and Wade opened the door without hesitation and walked in, and lit up the surroundings with his wand. In the room that looked like a city, the stacked furniture made the surrounding shadows look bizarre. Wade searched along the middle passage section by section, and finally saw his target next to a cabinet with bubbling surface. The old, rusty crown was placed on the pile of junk. It looked no different from other garbage here, even more worn out. The gray gems on it looked like unpolished stones. Above the crown, there were the words Tom Riddle. If it weren't for this line of words, Wade really couldn't determine his target in this garbage pile. Because he vaguely remembered that the crown seemed to be placed in a box, and it looked gorgeous, not this gray appearance. But in any case, the memory of more than 10 years ago was unreliable, but his eyes did not deceive him. Wade opened the box and put it on the ground. He picked up an old fire tongs from the nearby garbage pile, stretched out his arms to pick up the crown from a distance, threw it into the oak box, covered it with a lid, and sealed it with heavy spells, and then relaxed his tense mood. With this crown, Wade couldn't study the functions of the Room of Requirement as he wished. He was afraid that he would be affected by the crown if he was not careful. And Wade was also worried that others would discover the Room of Requirement because of his frequent visits, and then be confused by the Horcruxes like Ginny Weasley, causing a big mess. At this time, the Horcruxes were completely isolated, avoiding future troubles, and Wade couldn't help but feel a little excited. Just this Room of Requirement, he had too many unknowns to study. When leaving, Wade subconsciously pressed his school bag with his palm, but heard a voice suddenly say, "It's best not to take things out of the Room of Requirement, child." I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.